It's live. I'm sure you need to refresh or anything. Or? Okay, testing, 1, 2, 3. Sound out.
No personnel.
Okay, testing, 1, 2, 3. Sound.
Yeah. 1 2 1 2 testing. How's that sounding? No, roughly. Or will I give it a? No, I won't do that. All good. It's not a library. You don't have to keep quiet.
Another good crowd who begin online the event. So we've got Dave Cummins from Dingle Distillery, also from the Porterhouse.
Yep.
We do a whole range of stuff. He'll give us a bit of an intro. He's got some whiskies for us to try here tonight, 6 samples. He'll bring us through and maybe show us the components of what makes up one of the samples, and then maybe get us blending or something.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And then you go through them what you have on show.
Yeah.
All right. Okay,
so cool. Thanks a million, lads. So I'll let you get started. There's no point having your glass wet. If you want to pour the first one in, it's not water. Just so you know. So just pour it in and you can be smelling it and giving a little sip. My name's Dave. I am the brand ambassador and sales and general dog's body for Dingle Distillery and Porterhouse Brewing Company, our 2 sister companies. So we make gin, vodka, whiskey down in Dingle, and we make beer up in Dublin beside Glasnevin Cemetery. So Dingle would not have come into existence without Porterhouse Brewing Company, which was set up in the late 80s, early 90s by Oliver Hughes and Liam Lahart, 2 cousins. Back in the 80s, they moved to London like a lot of people in Ireland to get work, and Oliver was in college and that. And at the weekends, they used to go into Camden and into London and they'd try real ale, because back here at home in the 80s, you only had a few 4 or 5 beers on tap in most pubs. So when the lads came back to Ireland, they wanted to bring some of that back to Ireland. So they tried first by setting up a brewery in Wicklow called Harty's Brewery, but that soon went bankrupt, because when they tried to supply all the local pubs in Wicklow, the big companies, which is pretty much all your taps downstairs, said, if you take any of their beer, we're not going to give you anything and we're not going to support you. So Harty's Brewery went bankrupt very quickly. But then the lads were like, you know what, let's do it the other way around. Let's open a pub first and then further down the line, set up a brewery. So they opened their first pub in Bray, and Oliver had some crazy ideas. He had this thing where if anybody brought home a bottle of beer that they didn't have, he would give you a free pint. So when everyone was on holidays in Spain or Portugal, we were going into the most dust-ridden off licenses they could find, grabbing any bottles they could, bring them home in their suitcase and walk into the lads and go, here's 10 bottles, give me 10 pints. And poor old Liam was nearly having a heart attack, thought that the lads would go bankrupt again because of this. But that's why if ever you're in any of the Porterhouse bars, you'll see loads of old bottles up on the shelves. That's from where a lot of that came from. And then just the lads' love of different craft beers from all around the world. So they set up Porterhouse Brewery. Then they set up the first microbrew pub in Dublin there, Porterhouse Temple Bar. Soon outgrew that, and we moved out to beside the National Aquatic and then the Aquatic Centre in Blanche. And then about 4 years ago, we moved to beside Broom Bridge, beside Glasnevin. So we have enough room there now to expand for the next 50 to 100 years, hopefully. And all paid for by ourselves, obviously a loan from the bank, but we don't have anybody coming in. No angel investors or no kind of big company behind it. It's all family run. Oliver and Liam, when they were coming over when they were trying to set up the microbrew pub in Temple Bar, there was a guy called Peter who used to work in a microbrewery behind a pub in London. And the lads were like, got friends with him. And they were like, do you want to come over and give us a hand for 6 months and set this brewery up? And Peter has been there ever since. So the 3 names, so Peter is actually one of the owners of the company as well. So it was Oliver, Liam, and Peter. And you'll see their names on the bottles of Dingle. And you'll see them on some of the bottles of our Porterhouse beers, mainly some of the more barrel-aged ones. So yeah, Peter has been here nearly 30 years now. His wife works in the company. His kids come in and give a hand at the weekend in the brewery or when we've got big, massive orders that need doing. Unfortunately, Oliver passed away about 5 years ago, but his son Elliot has stepped in and also his daughter Holly works for the tapas restaurants that Porterhouse is part of our sister company as well. So yeah, the lads decided to set up Dingle Distillery, and when they were talking about it in the pub back in Porterhouse in Temple Bar, Liam was like, yeah, let's put it beside the brewery, which was out of Blanchetown at the time. And Oliver was like, no, let's stick it down in Dingle. And Liam was kind of like, how are we going to get stuff up and down to Dingle? Because that was the early 2000s, and like they're still only doing the Tralee Road into Dingle at the minute. Like it's still pretty windy. Like the bus drivers are crazy. They fucking take them corners like fucking Formula 1 drivers, but the rest of us take our time going around them. But Oliver wanted to build it in Dingle because Dingle was like his second home. You have to understand, the lads, Liam was a builder, so he was still working, doing buildings. He also was running the pub and a brewery. Oliver was a solicitor, running the pubs, running the brewery. So the lads had pretty full workload. So whenever Oliver had time off, he went to Dingle. Dingle was his second home. So he literally parked the car up and he'd go around all the pubs and meet all the people. He got that, well, like he'd be walking down the street and he'd be able to go, oh, that's such and such, and their daughter is here, their son is there, their father, their cousin owns this. And he knew everybody, so much so that when he passed away, Dingletown asked if they could host a second funeral for him down in Dingle, because he became such a part of the whole fabric of Dingle. So the lads cracked this scheme to set up a distillery in Dingle. The first thing when you're building a distillery or a brewery is, the first thing you look for is water. You need water, you need fresh water. So the lads, we found there was an old mill just on the outskirts of Dingletown. The actual place name is called Milltown. And there's no sawmill there, and it had a freshwater well underneath, and it has a water wheel on the side, which we will be incorporating into the renovations. So the lads decided to put the distillery there. It's one of those things, everyone's always like, where's the distillery? And I always just say, stand at the water's edge in Dingle and just look to your right at the bridge, and there's a blue galvanized shed, and that's the distillery. So yeah, the distillery was built in 2012. We did a cast program called The Founding Fathers. Again, this was another chat between Oliver and Liam in the pub one night. Liam told me one time they were sitting down after work at like 12:30, 1 o'clock. And Oliver was like, how are we going to get this distillery up and running? And he was like, do you know what we'll do? We'll sell private casks to pub owners, off licenses, private individuals, anybody who wants to buy them. And Liam was like, yeah, grand, that's no bother. Let me work out the maths on that, and we'll have a chat and we'll have a think. And they were meeting for lunch the next day. And Liam was like, I was walking up to meet Oliver, and Oliver turned around to me and goes, how many have you sold? And Liam was like, what are you talking about? And Oliver goes, casks. And Liam was like, we were only talking about it last night. And Oliver was like, I've sold 20. And Liam was like, so we haven't even decided a price or what the hell we have or what we don't have. Like, I haven't even started making it yet. And he was like, well, I've sold 20. How many have you sold? And Liam was like, I've sold none. So that was kind of the dynamic between the two lads. Cousins, they were very close, and that was just always the way it kind of went. It was always just these mad ideas, same as the beer. Like the lads used to get in trouble. We had an old beer that the lads called Probably, and we got a few cease and desist letters. We had another beer called Wiser Buddy. We got a few cease and desist letters, and yeah, as Oliver used, Peter and Liam used to say, Oliver used to say, oh, don't worry until you get the third letter. It's grand until you get the third letter. So we'll have it all sold by then. It doesn't matter. So, yeah, so there was a lot of that. And it was just kind of like a bit of crack, but also kind of going, yeah, we're here. Because even when they set up Porterhouse Brewery in Temple Bar, there was bets going around all the pubs in Dublin going how long they would last, because they didn't have any macro beers. So like any of the big beers like Guinness, Heineken, they have none of them. And everyone's like, oh, you'll never last. You don't have any of those. But the lads just wanted to offer something different, because they were like, what's the point? Every pub has the same thing. It's just different furniture. They're all offering the same. Why not try and be different? Because like, I know a lot of you would probably have noticed, like, it'll be something when I'm talking about single pot still whiskey. Like you'll see all the old pubs used to have, or still have, wine merchant, whiskey bonder, and all that, grocer across the top. And there was reasons for that. But anyway, what you're trying there is Dingle Single Malt New Make, okay? That is 65%, just in case. I probably should have said that at the start. But I wanted to get you to try that, because most of the time you never get to try New Make spirit unless you're in the distillery and they're taking it out of the third still. Even then you wouldn't get to try it because it has to cool down, because it'd be piping hot. So you'd have to let it cool down. So I always like to bring it along just to show people that is the character of Dingle Single Malt whiskey, okay? So that character should be the whole way through the single malt whiskies that you're going to try. We are also going to try a single pot still. But that character should be there. So that creaminess, that oiliness, it's a bit thicker, a bit heavier. The reason for that is because we have squat stills or small pot stills. So we've got 3 pot stills that we got handmade for us by Facets in Scotland. Put it this way, if you're trying to get stills from Facets in Scotland, you're looking at anything for a 10 to 20 year wait now. But because we were the first independent distillery, there was only Middleton, Bushmills and Cooley before Dingle was operational. So we got in before, let's say, the rush. So when we ordered our stills, we got them 6 months later. But now if you're looking for those kind of stills, you're easily looking at 10-year wait or 20-year wait. That's why an awful lot of the younger distilleries or the newer distilleries will get them made in Italy or different places like that. But they'll have an order put in with Forsyths, but they're just not ready. And they're just catching up. Because it's not only in Ireland where whiskey has exploded. It's exploded in Scotland, England, America, everywhere. So it's the same as gin. Trying to get juniper there the last couple of years was nearly next to impossible, and the price went up 3 or 4-fold because there was so many people making gin. But yeah, so I wanted you to try the new make spirit because a lot of people, you never get to try it. For me, it's something that you can taste. It's actually very drinkable at the 65%. We would do a slow distillation. So we have 2 shifts a day. Well, we have 2 shifts Monday, 2 shifts Tuesday, 1 shift Wednesday, because we only have 5 fermenters. So the shifts start at 6 in the morning until 2, and then the second shift is 12 to 8. So 2 of the lads or the girls come in and start the first shift, and they'll make, they'll distill some whiskey, and they'll also distill some gin and some vodka. And then the second shift come in, and then they'll do the same again. The reason we can only do a double, and a single is because we've got 5 fermenters, and we let our wort ferment for 36 to 72 hours. So that's kind of holds us back from doing more than that. In our renovations, we are hoping to add another 6 so that we'll be able to do double shifts or triple shifts if we want to. But this is another thing about Dingle. Everything is, people will say, what's the difference in Irish whiskey? Everyone will say, Irish whiskey is all the same. And my answer to that is, if that's the case, then all humans are the same and every single one of you should be the same. But it's all those little, tiny little bits along the way that makes it different. So in Dingle, we have a wooden mash tun. So we feel that will add more to our mash when we're making our mash. Again, our mash tun isn't automatic, so the lads and the girls have to get in and dig that mash out. Then we also have wooden fermenters. Again, we feel this will add a little bit to it. Again, we have our freshwater well 240 feet below. So all these little bits add to what you get, the character. Like for me, like a pub or a whiskey is like a person, and it's the character of that person that you like or you don't like. And then we have our stills. So our first 2 stills are, like we start off with 5,000 litres in our first still, and when we finish, we end up with 500 litres of this. So that just tells you how much you've left afterwards. You only end up with 10%. Because every time you distill, so when you distill in the first still, our first still takes 5,000 litres, you're trying to get the heart. So you don't want the head or the tails because they've got different chemicals or tastes or smells that you don't want. So like, the reason why your stills are made from copper, the copper reacts with sulfites, that holds in the bottom, that'll be at your tails. Your heads is more like your nail varnish, your rotten egg kind of smell like that. This is another thing that we do. We do everything by hand. So when we're separating the heart in each of the distillations along the way, we do that by tasting, by smelling, by measuring how high the alcohol is. Where in a lot of other systems, it's automated. So they'll be like, right, 1,000 litres has gone through, it's automatically switches over. Or they're like, it hits this certain amount of alcoholic proof, it switches over. Where in Dingle, it's all learnt. So you learn it from the other person. You train in for nearly 6 months, shadowing somebody, and then you reverse the roles and you learn the craft of distilling. So you're always trying to get the heart, and you keep taking the heart as you go along. We also have some boil balls, or to be like for reflux. So it literally means as it distills, turns into vapor. The vapor hits the copper, it kind of comes back down nearly like as rain droplets and kind of redistills again. So it just means that you're removing more of the impurities. It's nearly like that little bit on the bottle there. So they're called boil balls or reflux balls because it just causes it to go back. The whole idea is the more copper contact you have, the more of the impurities you're taking away. Okay? How did you find that first one? Yeah? Yeah. It, it is. It's like, I always find it's very much like walking into a grain store. If any are farmers, like myself, it's like walking into a grain store. It's just that whole barley surrounding you. Yeah, that's the thing. It catches people off. A lot of people think it should be harsh. It should be fucking like rough and ready, but it's not. It's very smooth, very creamy and oily, and it does have that kind of great. Some people might get aniseed. Some people might even get sea saltiness. It depends on your palate. Now, this is the thing. Everyone's palate is completely different, and nobody's wrong in what they're tasting. It's just the way you grew up and the different things that you tasted as you grew up. Like if any of you remember the old wine shows that used to be on TV and they used to be naming 40 or 50 things when they were tasting the wine, and you were like, how the hell are they getting that? Or are these fellas just absolutely, you know, bonkers? But the more you do it, the more you actually realize and you pick up different things. And the reason they say so many different things is because everyone's palate is a little bit different. And like further on as we go through the tasting, like if I say I taste caramel and you say you taste coffee and you taste vanilla, that actually falls into the same bracket. If ever you want to, if ever you're bored in work and don't want to do work, just Google the flavor wheel, and it's literally like a pie chart, and it just breaks down all the flavors into parts. And even though you're tasting different things, it actually all comes from the same, let's say, point. So like if I'm tasting, I always say citrus because some people taste lemon, some people taste lime, some people taste like a hint of grapefruit or something. It's actually all the same flavor. It's just the way that we all grew up and the different things that we ate when we were kids. And it's the thing that jumps into your head. You know, when you taste something, you're like, oh, that reminds me of this. It's a subconscious thing that just happens. But whiskey number 2 and number 3, right? So we're doing a deconstruction of our single malt, this lovely blue bottle here, okay? So as we're going, if you want to keep a little drop of 2 and 3, and you can try and make number 4 for the crack if you want. The reason I do deconstructions is because a lot of people don't get to taste what makes a whiskey. And a lot of people like will think, oh, I prefer bourbon, or I prefer sherry, or if you're even more into it, you'll be like, oh, I prefer Oloroso sherry, or I prefer Pedro Jimenez sherry. No, you can literally just pour probably half of the number 2 in if you want to. Just keep a little bit of 2 and 3 for yourself. If you want to, you don't have to. So number 2 is bourbon sample. And now it's been brought down to 46.3, which is what the single malt is at, okay? Yeah. So, believe it or not, that is a bourbon cask between the ages of 6 and 8 years old. So if you were in the shops, you'll probably say, geez, I've seen bourbon casks. That would actually be the color of a bourbon cask, even up to 12. And you'll probably say, well, I've seen bourbon casks, and they look an awful lot darker than that. And the reason for that is because there's caramel coloring at it. And I mean, it's only 2 or 3 drops. It has no effect on the flavor. It just darkens the color. And the reason they do that is because a lot of people drink with their eyes. And if they see something light, they think, oh, it's too light. It hasn't got a lot of flavor. But in actual fact, that's all. We don't add in any coloring. That's all natural from the cask. We don't mess around with it whatsoever. All our casks at the moment, everything that we have released up to date is all first fill. Now, we won't be able to keep doing that because it's very expensive. So like you're getting, so for example, we get these bourbon casks straight from America. We make sure they're empty. The lads and the girls always make sure they're empty. You never know what you find in them, and they're always tasty. Anyway, so we make sure they're empty, and then we fill them. So it's the first time they've been filled with new make Irish whiskey, or Irish spirit, not whiskey. Jeez, somebody will murder me on. No, and we don't leave them outside. We literally, because we're a small distillery, we order them in small amounts. Like your bigger distilleries would literally be ordering like container loads. Like in a container, there's about 20, depending on the size of the container, there's 24 to 26 pallets. And on each pallet is probably 2 high. Yeah, generally you fit 2 high in it. So each pallet would have 16 bourbon casks. You have 8 and 8 on top of each other. So multiply that by 26. So a lot, let's say Middleton or that, they could be ordering thousands of them, where we're only probably ordering one. We only do 20 to 30 casks a week. So just to put it in perspective, what we make in a whole year, Middleton make it one day. We're more about craft and quality rather than quantity. Like I'm not saying there's that wrong with the way but for us, We're a smaller distillery. Everything is hands-on. So everything is a little bit more, you know, bespoke and unique. So we'd get the casks and we'd fill them with new make straight away. We don't leave them outside to get water, because if you leave them outside, the water, it's the same as a wooden floor. You know yourselves, if a wooden floor in the summer, it shrinks, it expands in the winter if it gets moisture into it. So we literally make sure they're empty and then we fill them straight away and we rack them. So we would get a lot of our bourbon casks from the likes of Maker's Mark, Basil Hayden's, Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, Heaven Hill. We have some Widow Jane 10 that we might be doing something special with further down the line. Now, the only thing you probably notice that an awful lot of Irish whiskey in general is always aged bourbon and sherry. And the reason for that is because bourbon and sherry and Oloroso sherry tends to be more Oloroso sherry, is very predictable. So what I mean is it goes like in a nice steady gradient. It grows. So like if I taste it this month and next month, I have an idea where it's going to be the following month. It tends not to have wobbles along the way. It kind of goes in a nice steady, you know, straight slope upwards. So you can kind of judge how something is maturing. Whereas compared to wine casks or something like that, like port casks, they kind of go like that, but they have these little dips where some of the tannins that might have soaked into the cask come out, and it makes it a bit more puckering and a bit more kind of drying, and kind of, you want to get it at that sweet spot. So like, that's why an awful lot would have been, pretty much 95% of all Irish whiskey up until the last couple of years was always bourbon and Oloroso, because it was very predictable. You knew what you were getting and it was easy to manage. Bourbon casks, you can sit down with a distiller and argue with them what they think is their difference. Every bourbon is different. They all have different mash bills, but generally for a distiller or someone in maturation, they all tend to mature pretty nice and steady. For us, Graham, who's our head distiller, he came over from Scotland about, when did he come? 2019, the end of 2019, just before COVID hit. So he got locked into Dingle for 2 years. No. So Graham would have been the head distiller in Glen Moray. He also would have worked in Glenfiddich and Balvenie. So he worked for the Grant family, the people who own Tullamore now. And he came over to be the head distiller in Dingle. Well, there was a few reasons why he was so enticed by Dingle. One was, he was like to me, the way he distill is like going back in time and then going back in time again. He says everything is hands-on. There's no automation whatsoever. And then he said, your casks, he's like, all your casks are first fill casks, and they're all from little, small, you know, unique bodegas and wineries that other people just don't have. So like literally all our casks were first fill casks when Graham arrived. So he was like, nobody has this. And he couldn't believe how much sherry casks and Pedro Jimenez sherry casks we had. But for him, he feels bourbon, especially single malt or our single pot still, always feels bourbon casks generally come to their best spot between 8 and 12 years old. So this one is between about 5 and 7.5. Next year, it'll be about, because we do a Solero system, which I'll explain in a bit, but it'll keep getting older and older as the years go by. Now, generally, for bourbon casks, you're always going to get this kind of caramel toffee, you're going to get it on the front of your mouth, a caramel kind of toffee or sweet flavor, and then you're going to get maybe a sweet citrus coming on the back as you breathe out, okay? And the reason, again, as I said, a lot of people, you never really get to do this, so that's why I kind of put them side by side, and it kind of some people always say, oh, I prefer sherry or I prefer bourbon, and then when you actually taste them separately, some people end up changing their minds and going the other way around. How did you find it? Yeah? Any questions? The single pot still, the last one you're going to taste is all bourbon aged. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody, any questions? Nobody does. There is literally, so there's only Ger Buckley, and then there's another 3 guys. There was, what you call it, in Neffen. Unfortunately, he passed away, I think, about a year and a half ago. And then there was 2 other guys. Ger was meant to be training up people. He would have been in Kilbeggan, what you call, I can't remember his name now. And he moved to Neffen to help the guys out there. He did a lot of journey work as well. Like a journeyman was a person that went around different distilleries. But a lot of distilleries would actually send guys over to do crash courses in Kelvin. So Kelvin is a cooperage in Scotland, and you can go over and do like a crash course for a year. because I actually had a conversation with Jared Buckley from Middleton about this, and Jared was like, oh, he was meant to be taking on like 2 apprentices every year, but then they brought out Blender's Dog, Cooper's Crows and stuff, and then Jared became a little movie star and he had to go out and do all these things, so he didn't end up training anybody. So yeah, it's one of the biggest issues for Ireland at the minute is there is no Cooper. There's only 3 or 4. So it's a lot of running around and a lot of phone calls of like, how the hell do I fix this? And it's funny because an awful lot of it is pretty much like your wooden floors. Like it's shoelaces, a bit of tar or whatever like that. That's the thing. People are always like, oh, sure, you just make whiskey and you throw it in the shed and it's grand. You can't. You have to watch it. You pretty much have to watch it 24/7. So like, let's say I've got casks of whiskey and I've them standing like that and I've them 8 high, which you would with bourbon casks. And you'd have them however deep you need to, and you'd have about that much of a gap so you can shimmy down to check them. And if you're finishing at 5 o'clock and you notice the back row there's a leak, and you're like, oh, I'm going home, it's 5 o'clock. You can't. Someone always has to check it, because you could come in the next morning, that could be a 10-year-old whiskey and it could be all out on the floor. And what are you going to do then? Start getting a sponge and squeezing it back in? You know, it's money gone straight down the drain. So someone always has to pop in and check. It's the same like making beer or anything. Like the lads, when we're making beer in the brewery, like the lads go in on Saturdays and Sundays to check to make sure they're conditioning, which is just, you know, they're maturing the way they should be and letting the flavors develop. So like there's never a full day off, if you get me. And that's why older whiskies will be more expensive, because they have to be watched. And you end up getting less and less. So as it matures in Ireland, we have about 2 to 5% angel share. So what that means is evaporation. Ireland and Scotland, because of our temperature, we never really get that hot and we never really get that cold, unlike this week. And so our angel share is small. But in America, they can have anything from 10 to 25% a year evaporation, depending on where they are. That's why American whiskies never really go over the age of 8 or 10, because there'll be nothing left in the barrel, you know? So, yeah, so like it's actually shoelaces and stuff like that. So if it's the stave at the side, it's pretty much, yeah, turn it over, put a shoelace and then tar it over or a sealant over it. Like a floor, exactly like a floor. You remember, like if you took up an old carpet in an old house and you found out and you were like, you started and half of the shoelaces and the stuff came up and you were like, the gaps in the floor were like that. And you were like, how the hell did they live in this before this? But it was just fixing it as you went along. And that's what you have to do with some of the casks, you know. And then if it's the bung or if it's the top, it depends if it's the head or the tail. Generally, it's the staves that will probably go, because they're kind of just the way that they're shaped. Yeah, they have to be in tight. Like if you're ever down in Dingle and you get a chance to go into the cask warehouse, you'll see some of them where Paddy has fixed them. Paddy is in charge of the warehouse. You don't touch anything unless you talk to Paddy. He'll kill you. He knows where everybody's cask is. He's ridiculous. Yeah. Not really, not much, because like there will be, but you're going to let the weather, so you're going to have water seeping in at some point. You know, so you're going to be diluting it in some way and it's going to be changing the flavor. But like when you go into a cask warehouse creates its own atmosphere. Yes, the wood is dead, it's chopped. But when you walk into a warehouse, the wood is still breathing and it creates this whole temperature of itself. You can literally, it's like, I always say to people, it's like that watching Simpsons where Homer sees invisible donuts in the air and he's chewing the air. That's what it's like walking into a cask warehouse. It feels like you can chew the air. It's just because the cask breathing in and out, and it just completely surrounds, and it creates its own little environment. But yeah, if you did put it outside, it would just get weathered on the outside and it probably would get in and it'd probably ruin it on you. You know, depends. Huh? Oh yeah. Yeah, like some of them will leave them out to season them, but then it's just a case of like, you know, do you really want it to be that way or not? It depends. It depends. It's the distiller or the person who's maturing, and then it's space as well. Like, you know, so like a lot of them would leave them out to season them, but an awful lot of them would send them across to Spain or that to season them. You know, so they dry out quicker in the summer. So like Middleton would have contracts with Spain where they'd send over ones and back like loads of them, and they'd season them to dry them out quicker, so then they could make the casks quicker. You know. But yeah, so the reason why bourbon was used a lot is because there's a nice little agreement in America where bourbon casks can only be used once. So It's between the distilleries and the forestry guys. So the forestry guys, trees in America, your oak in America generally matures between 60 to 80 years roughly. In Europe, it's a bit later. In Ireland, it's very late. It's like 100 to 120 years. That's why you very rarely see Irish oak being used, apart from Dargaelic and stuff like that. In mainland Europe, it would be closer to 80 to 100 years. That's why a lot of them would get them in Spain and France and stuff like that. But America, 60 to 80 years. The forestry guys cut them down, cut them into staves for the distilleries. The coopers will make it into casks. They'll use them once, then they'll sell them to Ireland, Scotland, England, Japan, whoever's making whiskey, China, India, the whole lot. And then the guys need more wood, so the forestry guys. So it's literally a cyclical. Everybody keeps having a job. So the forestry guys keep planting trees, keep cutting down trees for the guys. The guys use the casks, sell the casks, they need more casks. So everyone keeps in a job. It was a very good idea. Like there is talk that they might change it just so that it'll open it up, because there's not as well in America, there's an awful lot of new distilleries, and just wood is, you know, harder and harder to come by. Like the cost of a bourbon cask would have been about €150 empty, and that's gone up to about $250. And then sherry cask, you're looking at the guts of 300 to 500, maybe 600. Now that's gone up closer to 7. So it just depends. Everything's kind of gone up and up and up in price. But as you can see, this is number 3. If you want to move on to number 3, or if anybody has any questions. No, all good. So again, you can see that's all natural coloring. So this is Pedro Jimenez sherry, okay? So it's not Oloroso. So a lot of the whiskey that you'd see on the Irish market would have a lot of Oloroso. There's very few Pedro Jimenez, because Pedro Jimenez casks are a little bit more expensive. So with Pedro Jimenez, they take the grapes and they dry them out in the sun, so it concentrates the flavor. So you're concentrating the sugars. You're making it more, it's literally, it makes it more thicker. If ever you drink Pedro Jimenez, it's very close to like treacle. If anyone remembers Bovril, it pours kind of like Bovril. A lot of restaurants would use it in their desserts to thicken up sauces, give it a more nutty and a more deeper fruit flavor. A lot of people would say it's nearly like a really rich, Christmassy kind of cake kind of taste. So Oloroso will be your younger sherry, which will give you a more lighter fruit, summer fruits. And then Pedro Jimenez starts getting into that more age. So it goes from, still has a little bit of fruit, but starts going into more kind of deeper flavors, going towards leather, but not, I don't mean like chewing a belt. It just means it's getting more grounded, more nutty, but still has a little bit of that fruit. But it's a very deep, rich flavor. And again, it'll give you a lovely color. So you can see there. Again, we don't add any coloring whatsoever to our whiskies. So that's all natural from the casks. We don't. Yeah, an Oloroso will be probably half as light as that, generally, you know. They'd all be between 5.5 and 7.5 years old. Yeah, yeah. So as I said, most Irish whiskies normally would have been bourbon and Oloroso, because Oloroso is a younger, you can get the cask quicker. Some distilleries even have seasoned Oloroso casks, which means they've been seasoned for 6 months with Oloroso. You take them to use them once and then they're done. Whereas ours, we've used first fill again. It's a lot more expensive. Your bourbon casks are the small little casks that you see outside pubs painted. So generally when they're outside pubs, that means they've no more, let's say, flavor to give. The cask is expired. So instead of dumping it, distilleries will paint it and stick it outside a pub. So that's the ones you see outside the pubs are bourbon casks. Whereas if you go into a sherry cask, they generally paint them nearly like a black color, and they're about 500 liters, so they're nearly 2.5 times the size, so they're massive. They're big, big casks. They impart an awful lot of flavor. Like some Pedro Jimenez can be 30 years old. So like if it's had Pedro Jimenez in it for 20, 30 years, 40 years, and then you're putting new, it's going to take a lot of flavor from it, an awful lot of flavor. It was because they were expensive. It was, the casks are expensive. The PX, the older the sherry you go, the more. So like if you went into a Amontillado, that's even more expensive. So like you've got Fino, Oloroso, Pedro Jimenez, Amontillado. So like it depends on how old you want to go, and the price goes up. So like the further you go, it goes from your Fino obviously is your white sherry cask, so it's more kind of like a light grapefruit, like a white wine kind of flavor. Whereas your Oloroso is kind of moving into them summer fruits, and then You go into your Pedro Jimenez Amontillado, which starts going, still has that dried fruit, but goes into nuttiness, and then even into more nuttiness as you go into Amontillado. But you're getting into really older casks. So the older it is, the more you're going to pay for it, plain and simple, even though it's empty. No, so these are all, everything at the minute has been full maturation and first fill. Yeah, so we haven't transferred from one cask to the other, apart from the release that we just released for Halloween. Yeah. 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 Yeah, they would. They'd, like, sometimes the stronger casks will impart a flavor quicker, and sometimes it can be overpowering. So you have to, like, the best way to describe it is, if I have 100 casks of anything, and I taste them in 10 years, let's say I'm going like, oh, I think I might do something, and I'm marking 10 years, I'm going to taste it in 10 years. 80 of those casks might be good. 10 might be like, they still need a bit of time. Another 10 might be like, geez, I don't know what the hell is going to happen with these, but I'm just going to keep aging them. So, like, you're never, because even though all the casks are the same type, each cask is individual. So it's about tasting. So, like, you'll notice, if you'll see some distilleries will have chalk marks on the side of casks or different things like that. So each distiller, so like Paddy and Graham, our head distiller, and Paddy, our warehouse manager or cask manager, the two boys go around and taste all the casks, and they'd have notes. They'd have their tasting notes on where they think casks are, and they'd taste like every couple of weeks where different things are. Because the way we've always kind of done it in Dingle is whenever we let the whiskey kind of tell us who's going to be ready. We don't go, right, we're doing this. We taste the cask and we see, right, this one's coming good, this one's coming good, this one's coming good. What do we want to make, kind of thing. Instead of going, right, we're releasing this next, we don't do that. We kind of let the casks do the talking. It just makes it a bit more, and generally you can see 4 to 6 months in advance, like what's going to, you can generally tell how it's going to progress, if it's been progressing nice and steady. Some of the other casks are a little bit trickier. But yeah, so an awful lot of distilleries only use Oloroso because it's a little bit cheaper, and it gives you more of a lighter, fruitier flavor. We have a lot of PX. It's a little bit more expensive, but the lads just love PX. So how did you find that one? Yeah? If you like PX, by the way, buy it. Go to Fine Wines and buy it. And, oh no. Yeah, no, but like, this is the thing. If ever you like certain casks that whiskey is made in, buy the things. So like, if you like rum, buy a specific rum that you know is being used. Because let's say, even wine, like we use we use up to 20 different cask types. But we can't work with the guys that make massive volumes, because generally they're aging stuff in, well, not aging it, they're putting it in stainless steel tanks. So we can't take stainless steel tanks and get flavor from stainless steel tanks. So we partner with other craft wineries, bodegas, rum producers, champagne producers, all those kind of ones. So if you know somebody, let's say you like Pedro Jimenez, then go and get a PX bottle, pour it on your ice cream. It's actually really nice. Put it in your coffee. It's really nice. If you're into old fashions, a spoonful in your old fashioned is lovely. Because the more you drink it, then the more we can get casks to use. And if you don't drink it, we can't get any casks, so you won't have any whiskey of it, you know? But it is actually really nice on ice cream. Yeah. I'd say 90% of the, if you step back in time about 5 to 10 years ago, where there was only like 3 or 4 distilleries, nearly all the whiskey that came out was bourbon, sherry, or bourbon. That was it. It was not, it was Oloroso sherry. It wasn't Pedro Jimenez. You very rarely saw Pedro Jimenez coming out. I know we have Oloroso as well. It's just we have a good order because we partner with Fernando de Castillo in Spain, and he's dead on. He's really sound. He comes over to us about twice a year. We go over to him twice a year, and we pick different casks that we want to. Like, he was like to me, Dave, do you want some Pedro Jimenez or some Fino or stuff for your tastings? And I was like, yeah. And then like 10 days later, like 12 bottles arrive, and I'm like, savage. He sent me over Armagnac and everything, and I was like, this is deadly. I don't know how much of it's going to make tastings, but yeah, so it's a good relationship, and it's working with those other small family businesses so that you can handpick and you can go, right, can we get, 20, 50, 100 of those. Like, we're not going to be ordering, you know, thousands and thousands. And them guys can't give you thousands and thousands. They can only give you a certain amount because they're only a size as well, you know. So yeah, so they're the two component parts of what make up Dingle Single Malt. Okay?
You said you were using Savour method.
Yeah. So I'm going to explain why this is a little bit different in a lot of ways. So if you want to, this is sample number 4, right? Now you can play around with 2 and 3 afterwards if you want to and try and come up with this. So normally when somebody is making just generally an Irish whiskey, it would be heavy on the bourbon and lighter on the sherry, because the bourbon casks, you can get them a lot quicker. They're generally cheaper. And then you generally finish it or round it off in sherry. And the reason people say finish or round it off is because generally bourbon casks give you a front of the mouth kind of taste. So if any of you remember the cowboy movies and you'd see like John Wayne or whoever swigging bourbon and you're like, Jesus Christ, how is he drinking that? Because generally bourbon is at the front of your mouth. It's made from corn or maize. And then once it goes past a certain point, we'd normally say it's a short to medium finish. It drops off a cliff. So if you're drinking bourbon and you want to round it off, you round it off with sherry, because sherry is going to continue that flavor on for you. So instead of it dropping off a cliff after 10 seconds or so, it keeps coming and keeps going. So you have more of a taste profile. So as you breathe out, you're going to get those sherry notes because it comes back your tongue, because it has those dried fruits and nuttiness. So it wouldn't be as sweet as on the front of your tongue. So that's what a lot of distilleries would have rounded it off or finished it in a sherry cask. But we kind of did something different. We have all first fill casks and we married them together. So what that means is we didn't transfer it from one cask to the other. We got a 20,000 litre oak vat from Forsyths in Scotland. Oh, this is Paddy, by the way. This is hilarious. So the shed's like, the vat room is like, or the room where we married it, is about this size. And there's a little door like that on one side, and then there's a big roller door on the other side. Paddy, true Kerry man, joking fashion, was like, Dave, come in. Because like at that stage, we only had it 2 weeks. He's like, look what I got in through that door. And he opens the door and there's this big 20,000 litre oak vat, like 2 stories high. And I'm like, Paddy, will you fuck off? I was like, there's the roller door. And like, what are you talking about? He's like, come on, it's a good joke. And I was like, no, it's not. It's absolutely brutal. But we put it in a vat. So we get bourbon casks and the Pedro Jimenez casks and we marry them together in the vat. Now the vat is open, okay? So it's 20,000 litres, right? We do a few different things that are different. So we drip dilute the whiskey. So what I mean by drip dilute, it's what a lot of Armagnac producers would do. It's slowly diluting the whiskey down to the 46.3. So they're all the casks are going in at cask strength. So they'd all be different strength. They'd all be between anything from 50 to 56, maybe 59. So you add them in and then you slowly add water. So Paddy and Graham would slowly add water for up to 8 to 10 weeks afterwards and bring it down slowly. Now, there's a few different reasons the lads wanted to try this. Because it's done with Armagnac and a few cognacs and that, a lot of them do it because it keeps more of the body, it keeps more of the earthiness and the flavor of the whiskey. It doesn't tin it out. If you add in the water too fast as well, if you add it in way too fast, you can actually split a whiskey. Okay? So they wanted to try and do this and see would it actually keep more of the body, more of the moorishness of the whiskey, and keep more of those delicate flavors. Because as you drop water into whiskey, there is a chemical reaction happening. So when I say to people, taste a whiskey, but if you want to add a couple of drops of water, add a couple of drops of water. And we would refer to as opening up a whiskey. Because when you drop the water in, so water is H2O, when you drop the water in, there's molecules in there. And as the water drops, it smashes those molecules apart. Hydrogen joins onto one, oxygen joins onto the other. The one that generally joins the oxygen is generally flavors that you don't want, and it'll escape out. And then it'll actually open up the whiskey and create more fruit flavors. If you ever want to get a really detailed account of that, talk to Rosie from Two a Glass, because she's the chemist and she can actually explain it down to a T, the reason why. And it actually does open up a whiskey. It brings out more of the fruit. It changes the whiskey over again. So that's why you don't want to drop it in. If you diluted your whiskey too quick, it could completely split it and change it too much. So the lads do this slow dilution, and we have an open vat. Then once we get it to the profile that we want, so it tastes like this, we take out 10,000 litres and bottle it, and then we refill that vat. So the vat is never empty. So it's like Solero in sherry, where they keep topping up the cask and keep topping up the cask, and it's literally like a ladder system. They keep topping it up, adding more alcohol to bring it, and so the vat is never empty. So the whole idea of that is, even though the whiskey will get older, so the first ones we put in were 5.5 to 7.5 years old. Next year they'll probably be a year older than that. It'll be 6.5 to 8.5, or maybe 6 to 9. But the taste profile should stay the same. There will be like that minute difference, but generally the flavor profile of the whiskey that you're tasting should stay the same. Okay? So that's one of the main differences that we do with this whiskey. So then there is no batches. Technically, there is no batches. So there's not a batch 1, 2, 3. It's literally just different vatting or different bottlings from that Solero cask. It's left uncovered indefinitely. Yeah. Huh? It's alcohol. You're going to, yeah. Oh no, you wouldn't. Like it's in a room that's like nothing really can get into anyway. But yeah. But don't worry, it's also non-chill filtered, so your whiskey is still filtered. So don't worry. Yeah, there's nothing funky going in. It's like that old story of, it was like, what was it, 1 year, something from Middleton didn't have enough bottles, and people started saying, oh, Jesus, swallows or something flew into the distillery and shit in the fermenters. And you were just like, who the fuck is making this stuff up? I was like, all fermenters are open nearly all the day because you have to let the CO2 out. That's every distillery since the dawn of time. And people were like, you just have these people sitting at bar stools making up these stories, and you're just like, don't be talking about something you haven't a clue about. I was like, Jesus, no. But like, you are filtering it. It's like, but it's the same as like cellars for champagne or stuff, and they'd have mold this size on the bottle cap, and it could be worth 100,000. You know, it's all these different things. It's the same as why was blue cheese invented. It was literally a lad stuck it in a wall when he was getting chased by some army guys. He stuck the cheese in the side of a mountain in a wall, in rocks, completely forgot about it, came back months later and was like, Jesus, this is weird, taste it. Oh, this is really nice. Hey, you got blue cheese, you know? And that's mold. So like, there's different things like that, you know, you have that won't affect different things. And plus, it is filtered, so don't worry. But non-chill filtered. No, most of them would use stainless steel. Yeah. Like that's the one thing. Like we generally, like we would have way more wooden. Like we have a wooden mash tun, wooden fermenters, and yeah, it's like what I'm saying. All those little tiny bits. It's not really going to impart that much flavor because all that's ever going to be in it is this. Yeah. So like, if I don't know if ever saw there was like staves from the John's Lane mash tun going around years ago where you could get them. And they're literally like the staves on this are about that thick. They're about 4 to 6 inches thick. And it was the same as the John's Lanes ones. And you could see in the old John's Lanes ones from like 1970 where the liquid had gone in half of the way. And that's the beauty. It's like no matter how much technology moves forward, it's still a craft. Making the casks, looking after the casks, you know, it's, you know, using yeast to ferment everything. It's still a craft, and knowing when it's right. Knowing when to give one a bit longer than another before you bring it and put it into the distillery. Because what you're literally making, you're making a beer and then you're distilling a beer. That's what you're doing, you know?
One of the cool things about the sherries and the way they put it is that you can have that one cask sitting there. It could be 300 years old.
Just downstairs.
So in theory, you have a 300-year-old sherry in there because you're not taking up the full amount all the time.
Yeah.
And some of the sherry houses are famous for this.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's just, it's building on and building on and building on. And it's just that, I don't know, it's just that craft, and it's a tradition. It's been done. And yeah, it's just, people don't question it really. Sometimes they do. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Is that the point that you're talking about, the up and down?
Um,
That it'll change with what
Yeah, some casks. So like, for example, we've about 20 different cask types in Dingle. So we've got bourbon casks, sherry casks, port, Madeira, wine casks, champagne, Armagnac, cognac, rum, tequila, mezcal, you name it, we have loads of different casks. So all these different casks react differently. Champagne casks are harder to get because generally they're so old by the time you get them, they're generally going to leak at the sides because generally you wouldn't get a champagne cask until it's 80 to 120 years old. So like all the different casks have different things. Champagne, for example, it gives more lighter flavors. But the ones that are the tricky ones are the wine ones. Because generally, especially red wine, you've got the tannins on the red wine as well as the flesh of the red wine. So if you've got a red wine that has aged in a cask beforehand, different parts seep in and out of the cask at different points because the liquid is breathing in and out. So it's breathing into the wood of the cask and then sucking it back out. So it's sucking that flavor back out into the cask again. So one time it might take the flesh of that red wine, and then the next time it'll take the skin, and you're like, oh, Jesus, what the flip? But then in a month's time, it's like you're hitting that sweet spot. The way I would always describe it is you've got your casks that go like that, and then you got your casks that are like waves. So like your port kind of goes like that, your red wine kind of goes like that. And that's generally just because of the flesh and the tannins of the grape. You don't get it as much with white wine because generally white wine is more flesh rich rather than skin rich. Whereas red wines is a lot of it. The first thing, if you talk to somebody about red wine, one of the first things they'll mention is tannins, you know, because that's that kind of tartness that you get. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, get a grape, peel a grape, eat the flesh of the grape. That's the flesh, that's the fruitiness of the grape. And then eat the skin, that's tannins. So when you eat the skin on its own, it makes your cheeks go in. It's called puckering. It just makes your cheeks go in and it gives a dryness. And that's if ever you want to understand, like everyone always likes to make wine and whiskey and everything overcomplicated. When somebody says, oh, it's a fleshy kind of sweet or fruity wine, that's the inside part. Or they're saying it's really heavy on the tannins. That's the skin part. And if you actually just peel a grape and do that, you'll completely understand. Like I train bars and restaurants and staff are like, oh, I never know what wine to describe. And I'm like, here's a grape, peel it. And they're like, what? And they're like, are you doing some like, you know, Karate Kid crap on me here? And I'm like, just trust me, just do it. And I was like, that's a fleshy sweet wine or a nice fruity wine. And then that's a more tannic wine. And they're like, oh my God, I get it now. And then they're able to describe wine. It's the same as whiskey. Breaking down the label on a bottle of whiskey. Single means from a single distillery. Malt means the recipe that went in to make it. So that means 100% malted barley. Pot still, single pot still. We really should have picked a different name because a lot of people are like, oh, it has to be made in a pot still, or is it to do with how many times you distill it? No, it's the recipe. So it's single means single distillery. Pot still just means the pot still recipe. And then same with single grain, single distillery, grain recipe, which means corner maize. A single grain is probably the closest thing we have to a bourbon. Okay? Now, just to explain this whiskey, I nearly had a heart attack when we actually finished what we were going to make this whiskey of. So when we actually made this during COVID. So when we make our whiskeys in Dingle, Graham and Paddy will normally put together 8 samples of casks that they think are just coming right. And then they'll get all the lads and the girls in the distillery to blind taste them on their own. So they're not together. And then they'll send a bunch up to Dublin to the brewery to like the 10 or 20 staff there, and they'll get them all to taste them there as well. And everyone blind taste them on their own. Because the one thing that happens if you're sitting beside somebody, if I taste it and I'm like, oh, I don't really like it, and the person goes, oh my God, this is deadly. The person beside you is like, this is brilliant. You're going to change your mind. So you don't want that. You want to be able to taste it on your own. So the lads sent us 8 different samples. Everyone tasted them on their own, marked them 1 to 3. We actually, nearly everybody picked the same 3, and then Graham decided the final one. So I was lucky enough during COVID, I was an essential worker. So I got to for working for a distillery and a brewery and being a farmer med, I was covered in all aspects, so I was fine. So I could travel the whole country. I even, at one point, I had somebody take a picture of me on the road to Galway and email it to the distillery going, was this a necessary journey? And I was like, somebody taking a picture of me in the van driving on the M6? And Michelle in the distillery was like, yep, they took a picture of you. But, so, huh? But,
guaranteed delivery because there's no traffic.
yeah. Oh, I could call to 20, 30 places in one day. Now I'm back to doing like 4 or 5 because of traffic. It's crazy. It was brilliant. You could stop and have a game of football on the street. It was deadly. It was like I could park anywhere I wanted. There was nobody, like, I wasn't doing circles and circles and circles trying to find somewhere to stop. But yeah, so we sent out samples, and then Graham finally picked the last one. And I was down at the distillery, and I was standing at the office door, and I said, so which one did you pick? And he said which one, and I literally just leaned against the side of the door, and I was like, Jesus Christ. I was like, do you think we have enough PX for that? And he goes, yeah, we've loads. So if you want to have, some of you probably know, but if you want to hazard a guess of how much bourbon there is in it and how much Pedro Jimenez there is in it, you can have a go, and you can mix it together if you want to try. But I will. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it's about 69% Pedro Jimenez and 31% bourbon. So, yeah, it's very expensive. That's why I nearly had a heart attack when Graham told me he was going with that one. Because I was like, PX is expensive, and then also, will we have enough casks to keep this going? Because this is the first continuous release we have put out. Everything before that has been limited batches. So there's only been a couple of thousand, and once they're gone, they're gone. So this one is available all the time. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, this would be, apart from, let's say, single cask Pedro Jimenez bottlings on the Irish market, like single cask bottlings, or, you know, the Redbreast PX or some of the Dunvilles, that's the highest concentration of PX in any Irish whiskey on the Irish market. Everyone thought we were nuts for doing it, but sure, look, it is what it is. We just wanted something that was a bit more approachable for everybody, because at the minute, Irish whiskey is expanding so fast. The demographic, it's one of the things that's actually in Irish whiskey's favor. We're getting more people drinking it across all the age groups. So you've got people from 18, 20, all the way up drinking Irish whiskey, whereas back in the day, you would have been Irish whiskey, or any whiskey in general, was like generally a retired person, a man, or sitting at the bar drinking a pint with a whiskey. You'd never really see anybody under a certain age drinking whiskey. Whereas now, 20 to 35, 40-year-olds are drinking it hand over fist. And this is the thing where, like, it's so versatile. You're getting really nice bars making absolutely class cocktails out of it. Then there's people being, like, making tall drinks, because it's not, the thing about it is, it's not there to be revered, it's there to be drank. It's like, you can make tall drinks, you can add soda, you can add lime, you can add ginger, you can do different things. You can make really, like the lads in Shelburne Bar in Cork have this absolutely mental cocktail, Kerryman, and they sell so much of it. Like, and it's just, that's what we want people to do. Whereas a lot of Scottish whiskey, the more peated ones, generally, if you're trying to make it into cocktails, you either have to go with the peat or completely mask it, and then it's very hard. Not all Scottish whiskey is peated, obviously. There are the few myths that, like, everyone always thinks Irish whiskey is peated and Scottish is, or Irish whiskey is unpeated and Scottish is peated, and Irish is triple and Scottish is double. It's not the case. It's just peated and double distillation fell out of fashion in Ireland, and the Scottish distilleries ran with it. If you went back 150 years ago or more, the first whiskey any Irish distillery would have made was peated. No, it literally just fell out of fashion, really. You know, it just moved. Like, if you look back, like, if any ever get a chance to look at some of the work Fionn O'Connor and a few of the rest of them have done, like Donegal would have been the hub of, and a lot of the northern distillery would have been the hub of peated whiskey. Parts of Munster would have been very big on peated whiskey. Like, nearly every distillery would have started with peated and then made unpeated. Like, but I'm talking 150, 200 years ago. Yeah, yeah, and you were surrounded by bogs, like, you know? But, like, and then double distillation. Like, in Dingle, we've done double and triple distillation and peated and unpeated. Like, nearly every second distillery now in Ireland has done peated whiskey. And nearly, I'd say, close to nearly every second distillery has done double. So you will start seeing them coming out. The only difference is distilling them to a higher level. It was just let's say the old traditional Irish crowd they felt like the copper pot distillation was the traditional way, and doing the column still was kind of bastardizing whiskey, which it wasn't. It was just another form of it. So that's why the Scottish lads ran with it, and then they end up having so much stock. That's the biggest issue for Irish whiskey, is we just don't have enough backstock behind us to compete. But at the rate we're going, we should hopefully surpass Scotch and be the #1 best-selling whiskey in the world again by 2030, 2035. And the reason for that is because Irish whiskey has become so versatile and we've such a wide demographic of people, you know, trying it and making different things with it. Okay.
Using Irish grain for the peat, or we have still bringing in the peat?
No, like there's not enough. There's not like Ireland. I know, like everyone's always like, oh, like grow. But Ireland, only certain parts of Ireland are good for growing. Like you have the Golden Vale. It's called the Golden Vale for a reason because the soil is sandy and the water is free draining, so it's good for growing crops. So like a lot of there is some peated, but you would have to get it from England or France or somewhere like that. Yeah, there's an awful lot of and there's an awful lot of them that just never did it, haven't done it in Ireland for 150 years. So if you needed peated malt, there's not very many that do it anymore. Because like, so it's just smoking the malt. So you're literally you can smoke the malt and you can also char the casks a little bit more to add more kind of that smoky flavor. Like some people when they taste this, they will like, oh, it's peated. I'm like, no, that's just oak. So oak and peat are very close to each other sometimes, depends. Like a lot of people when they taste the single malt will actually say, oh, I taste a little hint of peat. And I'm like, no, that's just the oak of the cask. It's just smoking the malts. Now, the more commercial way is done in stainless steel tanks. The old way is done on malting floors. There's very few that still do it. I think Sleeve League up in Donegal that just that opened there doing it. But they'd be the only ones. Everyone else gets a commercial. Like the peated malt that we used, we got from England. Yeah, yeah. It's literally just a wooden floor and you got a kiln underneath, a fire underneath, and the smoke comes up and you just rake them back and forth so the malt is literally infused with the smoke. Oh, it'd be a room this size or twice this size, and it'd have the kiln underneath. Yeah. Just with a raking it by hand. There's a good few, I'd say there's a handful of distilleries in Scotland that still do it. Yeah. Yeah. Huh? But that's the thing, like for us, it's always been a case of balancing the spirit with the cask. And that's when we'll hopefully have peated either next year out or the year after. And again, it's balancing. So it'll be a medium to low peat, but it's also about balancing the cask. So the thing is, like the spirit of your whiskey never be overpowered by your casks. And then the same with peat, it should never be, you should be able to still taste that spirit the whole way through. No, we literally empty them and refill them. Yeah. Generally only do that if you're reconditioning the cask. So if a cask needs a bit of work, so like when you're ordering casks, you can order grade A, grade B, grade C, grade D. So it depends how worn they are. So like if you're ordering a B to a D, you're probably going to take the top and the bottom off and char it again. Just because all you're doing when you're charring is you're making the oils come back out of the cask to, you know, give more flavor back into the new make spirit or the whiskey that you're putting in. Yeah, you're literally getting it. And you're trying to more take the bourbon flavor from the cask as well, you know? Yeah. Oh, that retails anything around the 55 mark, generally 55 to 65. So the way we kind of did it is like we wanted it to be something like before we had batches and they were a little bit more expensive because they were limited. This was kind of, I didn't want to, like the lads were like to me, what price? And I was like, I want to keep it under 60 because like your green spots, your red breasts are kind of, and your teal, they're kind of in around the 50 to 60 mark. Well, some of them are actually going to be going up by a tenner, I think, in a not so distant future from what I've heard. So yeah, I wanted to keep it within a price that people could have it maybe once or twice a week. But it wasn't, you know, it's not a blend. So like when we talk about whiskeys or shells, like I talk about it shells. So like I talk about your bottom shelf, which is your blend. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It just means they're priced for a certain, you know, it's an everyday whiskey. You can do anything with it. You can make Irish coffees, hot whiskeys, whatever. They're around 20 to 25 to 30 euro. Then you got your more kind of limited editions, you know, maybe little finished casks. They're about 30 to 50 euro. Then you generally have more, you like your single malt, single pot stills, and then you move up to your premium and your super premium, which is another new made up word, I think, or ultra premium that they call themselves now. They always like coming up with these words. But yeah, so we wanted something that people could go to, and it wasn't, before our batches were always just something we'd be like to people, buy it for someone's birthday, buy it for Christmas, buy it for a special occasion, open it for graduation or something, you know, make it something special. Whereas this one, I'm like, get it, play around with it, try it, do different things with it, make it your own. That's the thing about it. So our whiskey are non-chill filtered, so we don't chill them when we're putting them, when we're like, let's say, getting them ready to put in the bottles. The reason we don't chill them is the same thing as what I was saying before about the molecules. If you chill it, you're going to destroy some of the flavors because some of it will actually chill to the point where it disintegrates. So we don't chill filter, and you'll actually notice that it was generally all the smaller distilleries were doing non-chill filtering. It was a unique selling point, let's say, but it was also because they wanted to keep more of the flavor. And now you're starting to see more of the bigger guys starting to do non-chill filtering because they've seen, oh, customers are actually asking for this. So we do non-chill filtered. These are married together, so it's not moved from one cask to the other. If you're wondering what that, most of you probably know, the Remboy on the front, or if you don't ever say Remboy when you're in Dingle, it's Ramboy, or they'll murder you. So the Ramboy, so Dingle has the Ran Festival on the 26th of December. It's actually a big, massive, giant street party. All the different clans come in from the street, stop in every pub on the way in, shock horror, sing, have a pint, and then work their way in, and it's a big, giant street party for the whole day. If ever you want to go down for, like, we've people from that distribute for us in England coming over this year to go to the Wren's Day Festival because it's just absolutely bananas, and it goes on until 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. But we have metal cut out of the Ramboy outside the distillery because the one in Dingle has been pretty much the longest running Ran's Festival. The Guinness Book of Records were down checking out Fungi when he was still alive. Unfortunately, he's passed now, but they were checking to prove that he was the longest solitary dolphin in one spot. But they were also looking at that Dingle had the longest running uninterrupted Ran's Day Festival because, put it this way, even during the Civil Wars and everyone, nobody was going as far as Dingle because it was over the hill and far away. So yeah, it's one of those ones that's just been there forever. And Oliver and Liam and Peter were like, we want to be part of Dingle for that length of time. So that became like our logo. We always had it on the top of our bottles. So every bottle that we've released has always got the Remboy on the top. And we put it on the front of the bottle this time. And then we also have a sketch of the bay. And that's the sketch of Dingle Bay as you're standing with your back to the distillery. A lot of people find it weird that we actually have fresh water underneath us and 20 yards away, your salt water. But we've all of Slay Head and everything coming down the hill, down the mountains to us, and then it goes out. We nicknamed that Oliver's View. It's on the front of our gin and our vodka bottles as well, a little kind of square patch on the... So Oliver Hughes, he used to stand at the gates of the distillery and literally just shout at people, come on in and do a tour, come on in. And he literally dragged them as they're walking by, as they're walking into the town. Lo and behold, we didn't actually have a license to do tours. But anyway, he was dragging them in and doing it. So it's kind of, we call it Oliver's View. And we have it kind of as a thing for it. It's on all our bottles. And then we just have a little gauge there on the side showing that we've the water 240 feet below. Because it's just something interesting for people when they don't know about different things and they can look at it and they can find out. And then we also have like a stave cut out of the bottle because we always have staves on our batches. So that's the side part of the cask. So we'd always have different amounts of staves depending on how many cask types we used. So we just cut it out of the label. And then we've got hand cut from the edge because Dingle is the most westerly distillery in all of Europe. Next stop is America. So we are the most westerly distillery in all of Europe. And everything that we do in Dingle is done by hand. We don't have automation. We do have a semi-automated labeler now. The lads call it semi-automated because it keeps fucking breaking down. But before that, every bottle of Dingle that you got, the lads and the girls used to get all their friends in at the weekends when we were releasing batches, and we literally had these wooden plinths. Because if you notice on a bottle, it has a little groove. Every bottle has different grooves or has a little bit of glass at the back, and that's for positioning. So the lads and girls used to position it on the and they used to put all the labels on by hand. So they used to get all their friends, and it was generally most distilleries bottle in March or April, and then again in October, November. And we always, for some reason, did it in October, November when it was absolutely Baltic. So you'd see them there in the fucking galvanized shed, and they'd be wearing 10 layers, and they're there putting on the labels. And sometimes it'd be that cold that the glue wouldn't even stick to the fucking bottles. And then you have these caps on our. This is a funny story about like the starting of Dingle. So the foil caps that you put on your bottles of gin, vodka, and whiskey, they come wider and their heat, they react to the heat and they shrink. So the lads didn't actually have a machine for doing it. They had little heat guns, but they also used to just leave a kettle boiling with the lid off and just twist the bottle over the top of the kettle, and that used to shrink it. That's the way they used to label all the bottles of gin, vodka, and whiskey. Even now, we only do 4 bottles of gin and vodka at a time. That's how much we fill at a time. And they're all labeled, batch numbered and everything by the lads and the girls by hand. So every bottle of whiskey, gin, or vodka that you get out of Dingle has gone through a lot of hands. Yeah. But yeah, so that's why we kind of have all those details on the bottle. Normally before this, like non-chill filtered whiskey is generally 46% or above, okay? So that's why all our whiskey has always been 46 or above. We've always released a 46.5, but just to be a little different, we put this out at 46.3. Anything under 46 is chill filtered. So it's something again that we wanted to differentiate, but also we feel, and the distillers like Peter and even Michael at the time when he was with us, we just felt that it kept more of the flavor. Okay. Anybody any questions? Yeah. 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 So thankfully all our bottles are the exact same. It's just the label is different. So when we order them, we order, let's say 10,000 at a time. You know, so we're generally covered because like even now the next whiskey that you're going to taste was only 10,000 bottles. So we generally are covered. We generally, once we hit a point, yeah, we do put in an order. Now, the last couple of years have been absolutely, especially last year was nuts. Like I had one of the distilleries from Donegal ring me because we're all friends and we all try and help each other out. And he rang me and he was like, Dave, who'd you get your bottles off? And I was like, well, we get our vodka and gin ones off these guys and we get our whiskey ones off these guys. And he was like, oh, feck. He was like, my crowd's after, and this was February of this year. And he was like, my crowd's after ringing me and said, I need your order in by the 1st of April for Christmas. And I can't guarantee you'll have it by Christmas. So he was like, how the hell am I meant to know what I want to do for Christmas in February by the 1st of April? And then they're still not guaranteeing me that I'm going to have my delivery. Like we've a whiskey pack that just came out. We had everything ready. We've a glass, bitters, and a little glass stir. We're waiting for the boxes. The boxes were meant to come in October. They came the last week in November. Same as like a gin gift tube last year. That was meant to come in October. It arrived in February this year. Yeah. And it's happened to everybody. Everybody. Yeah. Oh yeah, we kept it for this Christmas. We were just like, what are we going to do with it now? It's like the first week of February, and we were like, oh, we could release it for Valentine, but we were like, no, we've got like 10,000 of them. We'll wait until Christmas. So we just kept them in the stores until Christmas. Yeah. Yeah.
Is the work we've done to actually, bring a native bottling manufacturer to?
Yeah, like that's the funny thing, like because I've always worked in the craft industry of, let's say, beer, whiskey, and all that. Like even the pub I ran back in Dublin back like 15, 20, we didn't have any. It was us and Porterhouse were the only 2 craft bars in Dublin. And like I knew all the lads and girls. Like even when the first microbrewery started in Ireland, there was no bottler in Ireland. They had to literally get their beer made in England or Scotland, bottled there, and then shipped back to Ireland. Like there's only a canner after coming into Ireland. Like Midland Craft Canners only, they rent out canning machines to people. They only set up in the last 10 years. So like there's definitely call for it. Like the bigger guys are generally okay because they have plants. But the smaller guys, like we do, like as we grow, we're getting different machines in to do it. But we can only, like our whiskey, our gin, and our vodka are only filled 4 at a time. But it's the same as anything else. It's like sugar beet and stuff like that went out of Ireland years ago, and now it might come back in again. Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone in the room here probably has an empty one.
Yeah.
And if you did a return policy.
Oh, we do it with Dingle Town, but it's just trying to do it across the country is next to impossible. Yeah. But see, the thing is, there's like, even let's say if you only did it with distributors, there's about 20 to 30 different distributors in Ireland. And then if you break that down into multiples, let's say your super values, your Musgraves, down to like your independent off licenses, your groups like Carrier. Yeah, it's an absolute minefield. Like we do it in Dingle Town because we're right there. And that's the only, And we're even actually looking at these. We're going. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. We're going testing out. It's something that me and Aidan have been working on. We're going testing out this thing where we're actually going to be selling like. So we're trying to remove as much, let's say, carbon footprint for the town as possible, Dingle related, and the town is our test baby, pretty much. So we're literally going to be going to try and see does these eco kegs or eco. It's literally like a keg. So we're going to be giving them a keg of gin, a keg of vodka. So then they only actually keep 12 bottles or 6 bottles for the shelf at the weekend, and then it has a little pump, nearly like when you see in movies in America where they have a kegger. But it actually has an automated pump, so they literally just press the button and fill the bottle and put it back in the shelf. So then the thing is, we'll have a little milkman carriage that goes around the town, swaps the kegs out and gives them a full keg of gin. So instead of them buying 20 bottles of gin or 24 bottles of gin every week, they've bought 6 or 12, however much they need for the optics or whatever, and that's them, and they'll be able to fill them each night themselves. So that's what we're looking at doing in Dingle Town next year. And Dingle Town will be like our test run to see then if we can do it. So the whole idea of is the people that are doing larger volumes or, would have it on their shelf, that they wouldn't have to keep buying in. And plus it's easier than, carrying in cases and cases and cases every week, There is in some countries that do have it and it works really well, but they're really organized countries like Japan and that. And they actually have it working like a tea. And it's just, like back in the day, Ireland, we used to do it all the time. You had to return all your bottles. But yeah. 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 You don't want to be changing it. Yeah. It's all about time management. Yeah. Yeah. But that's something that we're going to hopefully test run in Dingle next year if we can, with just all the pubs in town and the hotels and stuff. See how it goes. Yes, back in the day. Yeah, back in the day there was a lot. I remember what was it in 2002 or 5, and Revenue went round and tested pubs in Dublin in a 2-mile radius, and 80% of them didn't have what was in the bottle. And I was just like, Jesus, that's bad. I thought like if it was going to be like 10 or 20%, I was like, okay, but 80%, I was like, flip, that's an awful lot. But yeah, so like there is different things that we're going to try. And do, and we're always, that's the thing about, we can kind of react and try different things. So that's one of the things that we are going to hopefully test out. And then if it works in Dingle, then like if I have a pub and he's doing a certain amount, then I can go, here, listen, if we can put it in keg and drop it to you like a keg delivery, would you take it like that? But it's also then up to the owner of the place whether or not they want to do it that way. But generally, because you're removing the glass, you're going to be removing a lot of the cost, so you'll be able to give it to them at a better price, generally. You know that kind of way? Yeah. Yeah. Huh? No, generally, I think it should be okay. I'm not sure now. I don't think it should be, because it's the same as like having your, I think Diageo have the Smirnoff taps, and they're all out of kegs as well. And that's the exact same thing. It's just a keg into a glass, like they've got them cocktail things. Yeah. Yeah, and that's made in, let's say, warehouse, just pouring, let's say, kegs into other kegs and mixing up a cocktail. I don't know. We might do like a Father Ted episode of like get the brick, move all the boxes, and then just drive through them. But yeah, so that's our single malt. I hope you can taste the 2 component parts that make it up. I just like doing it because it kind of throws people for a loop, because it just gives you the chance of seeing what comes into it. And again, you got to taste the new make, so you should be able to taste that kind of character the whole way through, Yeah. Like our pot stills are very small and fat, and then our swan neck literally goes straight curve out, like it doesn't go up very high. So like when I'm saying swan neck, it's the neck that comes out at the top of the still. So the best example to give you is obviously the tallest stills in the world, which is Glenmorangie, or you can argue how you pronounce that. My mate Paul from Glenmorangie will be on to me now. You said that wrong. It's Glenmorangie. And I'm like, I don't care. You're from Dublin. You want to be Scot. So like they've got really tall stills. So what that means is they've got the still and it's got a big long neck and a big long swan neck. And the reason they have that is because they distill it and they want to make the spirit nearly as light as possible. so that when they put it into cask, it takes a lot of flavor from the cask, but their spirit is very light. Whereas we want to keep more of the oils and the characters of our whiskey, and we want it to come out so that it still has that kind of, thick is probably the only best way of describing it. You know, a more kind of palatable, more, you can feel a lot more in your mouth from it. It's not, and it's going to be a balance between it and the cask, and it's not going to be like, I just want all the flavor from the cask on top of this. No, like you can get into the whole argument, like, oh, I've seen people argue like, oh, trad pot and pure pot still and all this kind of stuff. But this trad pot is like old traditional pot still, where it's like old, really thick, heavy. It depends. You don't want to get into that argument. You could be here all night, but it's like some of the old, let's say if you had an old 1970s bottle of Redbreast or Jameson or something like that, that's old trad pot, where it's done a different way. So like even though Middleton, let's say, have the same stills, they run them at different levels and different speeds, let's say, or at different temperatures to create the different whiskies. So like, even though they have like, I think 20 stills, but they could actually make all their whiskey out of maybe 6 of them because they run them differently. So they could create Powers, Paddy, Redbreast, and all of them differently out of the same stills because it's to do with the recipes and how quick and how fast or how slow they do the distillation. And some of that, some people will argue some of the old trad pot is a lot more heavier, a lot more denser, a lot more punchy in the face. It's really, but then you can also get into the argument that distillation has moved forward and things have become more like anything. It moves forward in ways and it gets more refined and different things like that. So it's one of those kind of endless arguments of like, what's the difference between a stout and a porter? You could, be there all night, but it's kind of more of that kind of heavier, more characterful kind of spirit. That's what we wanted to create. Any questions? Boiler. Yeah, that keeps switching itself off every so often. About 2 hours into it, and they're like, oh, and then the next minute you see them legging it out the back, and they're like, feckin' boilers after going out. So yeah, boiler. Hopefully in the renovations, we'll be trying to move more kind of using, be a little bit greener. But you do need to get up to a certain temperature to do it. Like one of our distillers, Koch now, she's gone to be distillery manager, head distiller in Hascraw, and they're going to use a lot of geothermal to get it up. But it's whether or not they'll be actually able to get it up to that firing position where it's going to be actually hot enough. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm hopefully calling out there next week. Dingle? Yeah. Well, if you are, give us a shout, because the distillery is closed at the minute because we're getting ready for renovations. We have one objection. And no. Well, we had our staff party. We were in Killarney. Killarney Brewing still is nice, massive. No, it's just somebody down the road. The usual. It's always in Ireland, not in my neighborhood. But yeah, no. But if you are, give me a shout, because we can organize like a tasting in the cask warehouse and stuff like that. Yeah, definitely. Or even up among the pubs like Dick Max or Johnny Fox's or something. Or Johnny Fox's, Foxy John's. Jesus. That's because one of my mates was in Johnny Fox the other night and was like, "Are you coming up?" And I was like, "Have you seen Dublin Mountains?" But yeah, like, I hope loads of people try it and play around with it. I've actually made some really interesting drinks with it. I was actually doing an Italian Tuscany bistro here in Limerick. So I do a bit with Maxine and them. So we normally do like supper nights or dinner nights where we pair cocktails with the courses. So the chef, we went with a really crazy, well, I wanted to try this cocktail that I had done years ago, and I was like, we're going to do a twist on it. So he was doing like a bacon-infused ice cream sandwich. Yeah, with Pigtown here in Limerick. And then I got him to cook bacon, streaky bacon on tinfoil, and I poured the fat off that. I poured 2 bottles of this into a jug, and I poured the fat into the whiskey, just to fat wash it. And then I made maple syrup and bacon fat washed old fashions. But then I got the streaky bacon that he had cooked, and it was like stiff, and I used it as the stir. So just a little bit of orange bitters and stuff. Like, I made 40 of them for everybody that was there, but it was the one cocktail that I made another 20 on top of it, because everyone was like, drinking it so fast. Yeah, it was just, instead of using sugar, I used a spoon of maple syrup, and then I had the whiskey fat washed with bacon. It's really, really good. Yeah, but that's the thing. Have a bit of fun. Yeah. But anyone, any questions? All good? If you want to grab a pint or a drink or something, go for it, and then we do the last two if you want. Or you want to keep going? Yeah, but that's the thing. Don't be afraid to add drops of water. Like this whole thing of people going, oh, you can't do this or you can't do that. Make the whiskey your own. Like the thing about, I always say to people, even if you're trying gin, vodka, rum, or anything, taste it first. And then whatever jumps into your head, do it. So like if you're tasting a gin and you're like, oh, apple jumps into my head, or orange, go to the veg shop, get an apple, get an orange, chop it, throw it in, and then put in whatever else you want. You know, it's about making the drink yours. You don't have to, there's no set rules to it, you know? Like adding water, like you can add ice here in Ireland because the temperature is so fucking cold, it's not going to melt. But if you were in America, the ice would melt in fucking 2 seconds and it'd be way too diluted. So like here in Ireland and Scotland and the UK, you're generally fine. Huh? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but that's the thing. Like with a higher percentage whiskey, you can actually do. You can't get a lower percentage whiskey and then add back in alcohol. You know, you can try, but it doesn't work. But you can always go down from a higher whiskey, and that's like when we go on to the next one, you'll see what I'm talking about. But it's just, it allows you to play around with the whiskey more and make it your own. It was just, so like every bottle of whiskey or every bottle of spirit that you try is batched or bottled at a certain percentage. And that certain percentage is the percentage that the person who made it, your distiller or your blender, thinks is the best percentage to drink it on its own. That's all it is. And then there's other things as well that factor into it. Over 46% non-chill filtered as well. But like 46.5, like our whiskey is generally 46.5. That single malt there is 46.3. Our gin is 42.5. Our vodka is 40. And they're all the different strength. When Peter was making the gin and the vodka, he was like, if you want to drink it on its own, that's the best strength. And that's why it's at those strengths. And then obviously you need to keep it over a certain, like, well, with gin and vodka over 40, or else it's, once you go under that, it's a liqueur. 46 is the mark. Under that. If you're going under that, it's not going to be chill filter really. Yeah. Well, like a whiskey will go cloudy if it goes cold enough. You know, like some people like, I've seen a lot of kind of Facebook chat groups and stuff where people have brought stuff back from holidays and they've chucked it in their check-in bag and they're like, Jesus Christ, and they stuck up a picture. Oh, the bottle is ruined. It's all cloudy. Will I put it through a coffee filter or something? And I'm like, no. It's literally like bottle shock in wine. It's like you need to just let it settle. It's like put it in your kitchen or your living room, let it get to room temperature. All that's happening is the different molecules are reacting and they're colliding and it's looking milky. Now that can happen with gin. I've seen it happen with a few micro distilleries when they were trying to rush out gin. Like you have to give, like, because gin and vodka will come out at 70% alcohol, but it'll also come out piping hot. And if you add your deionized water, your well water into it, then it'll go cloudy like milk of magnesia and it'll never settle. There's nothing wrong with it, but it just looks god awful. But you have to let it cool down and then add your water. It's just chilling it. So like if you chill it, like some people feel that if you chill it, you're gonna freeze some of them molecules that are flavor molecules that you want to keep in it. Whereas if you non-chill filter it, you're not doing that. You're not subjecting it to freezing, not freezing it, but chilling it down to a temperature that might actually destroy some of those flavors. Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of like, it's funny, if ever you go to, like, if there's ever an awards or an industry night, you'll see some distillers and they're always like, it's the whole like Irish thing of like, they're mates, but they're always hitting digs at each other. So like, you'll see one of them go by, oh, geez, does your whiskey even touch the copper? And it's like, and it's them kind of going, geez, you distill so fucking fast. Does the spirit actually even touch the still? Like, you know, and it's all these kind of little nudges and stuff, and they're all just messing at each other, but they're all so serious at the same time. They're always like, no, this is the way I do it. You're fucking wrong. But I'm not going to say you're fucking wrong. I'm just going to, you know, slag you. And that's just the way it is. It's hilarious when you see them. And it's just, you'd be standing at the bar and one of them would say, want, and you're like, here we go. And it's like just, it's just an absolute slagging match. But yeah, so we move on to the next one. I think there's one or two people to come, but we'll move on anyway. Cheers. Yeah, well, that's the idea. We wanted people to have it and play around with it and do stuff with it, There you go. Yeah.
Oh, no, it is.
Yeah, generally the single malts were 70 to 90, depending on the cask type. And then the single pot stills are always generally about 20% more. I'll explain why single pot still is always more expensive as well. Huh? Yeah, I always like Graham, our head distiller. I'm like, he came to Ireland to learn how to make whiskey, and he's like, oh, shut the fuck up. And I'm like, look, it's true. I was like, oh, and you had to come back to Ireland. We have to teach you how to do it. So we're going to move on to whiskey number 5. Cool.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Guys, thank you very much.
So this is our latest release. Now, this is it's called Savour. It's funny, I was in Holland trying to get the lads in The Hague trying to pronounce this right. They kept calling it Sam Hain. But anyway, Savour. So it's Halloween, obviously. It's a new release we're going to be doing, new releases we're going to be doing over the next 2 years. So it's you can see on the bottle there's like different symbols in a circle. So it's the Wheel of the Year series, and it's kind of Celtic and pagan old different festivals throughout the next 2 years, and we'll be releasing single malts and single pot stills. Now, this is cask strength. This is 50.5, okay? This is aged for 5 years in bourbon casks, first fill bourbon casks, and then it is transferred into muscatel dessert wine casks for a further 2 years. Now, some people would call that a finish. I would probably call it a double maturation, because a finish is generally 6 to 9 months. You generally wouldn't go longer than that. So I would call it nearly like a double maturation. But there's no actual technical file or term to state what the difference between a finish or a double maturation is. But I'd call that a double maturation. This has given us the opportunity to show off some of the other casks that we have. So up until now, we have released bourbon, Oloroso, Pedro Jimenez, port, and Madeira. That's it. And we have, as I was saying to you before, we have about 20 different cask types. And this is going to give us the opportunity to show off some of those cask types that we have. And then hopefully in the next 2 years or so, we'll hopefully have a single pot still to go with that, or an age statement as well. So we're going to be releasing 8 different whiskies between single malt and single pot still. We haven't decided exactly what the breakdown is going to be. As I said, we know what the next one is, because we're releasing it on La Fela Breach in February. But the other ones were kind of still, up in the air. So it might be 5 single malts, 3 pot stills, or it might be 4 and 4, or it might be 6 and 2. We'll see how it goes. We have about 10 or 12 different options that we've aged, and we'll see which ones are coming good at the different times. So again, this is just something to show people the other casks that we have. Bourbon and muscatel, they just go really well together. You're literally adding sweet on sweet, but different kind of levels and textures. So your muscatel dessert wine adds more kind of crystallized, kind of gingery, kind of deeper kind of flavors, where the bourbon starts it off nice and sweet, and then the muscatel gives it a more deeper and richer kind of flavor. We went with cask strength because we've seen that a lot of people have been asking for cask strength and aren't afraid of whiskies at cask strength. And again, it allows you to add water and bring it down, because you can't go the other way around. It's the same as what you're seeing. 50.5. Yeah. So it allows you to add water and bring it down. It's the same as like there's no coloring added. It's same in beer. You're seeing a lot more beers that are unfiltered, because now people are realizing, oh, it's nothing wrong with it. It's just unfiltered. It's before that, people were adding coloring to whiskey. They were filtering the crap out of beer. But now people are understanding more about each of these kind of products. So they're not afraid to try those different things. And, be a bit adventurous. So Savour came out on the 31st of October. I'm getting my dates right. Yeah, God, brain isn't working right. We only released, it was really annoying. This is one of the bottle problems, or packaging problems. We had ordered 10,000 boxes to do this, and the lads that we ordered them off read the email wrong and thought it was only 1,000 and sent us the 1,000. And then we were like, where's the other 9,000? And they were like, what are you talking about? And we're like, it was 10,000. And they were like, oh crap, 2 weeks, give us 2-3 weeks. And because they knew they'd kind of screwed up. So we actually got it. So there was a bit of a panic because we only released like 1/10 of what we had. So it was only 10,000 bottles. We're going to be releasing, not all of them are going to be 10,000. Some might be 5 or 6, some might be 7 or 8. It depends on the casks. That's what I mean. We don't dictate. We know when we fill them. Again, cask strength, play around with it, do what you like, taste it on its own, and then add a couple of drops of water. It gives us the chance to show you the different casks, which will be really interesting because before this, we haven't been able to, How would you find it? Yeah? Yeah. Fine wines, I think, have another, I think James has about 6 or 7. I'd say this will be gone by Christmas, to be totally honest with you. We kept 3,500 bottles for Ireland and the rest went international. So like we ship everywhere really. We're in America, we're in Asia, we're in Australia, New Zealand, Europe, the whole lot, So we've got some old relationships that are really good and then some newer ones that we're trying to build. And then there's some countries like I was doing Brittany there in France about 3 weeks ago, and they're still massive. Like Irish whiskey, we like to think in Ireland, we have come a long way. But when you go abroad, you realize how feckin' more you still have to do when you walk into an off license and there's 4 bottles of Irish whiskey and there's 200 bottles of Scottish whiskey. So, we have gotten so far, but it's like we still have an awful lot of work to do. So yeah, so this one, you've got the different symbols. So there's different symbols all the way around, and as we release, the different symbols will come up. So obviously, St. Bridget's is the next one there with St. Bridget's Cross or Law Féile Bríd. Trying to get Graham to pronounce his Gaelic right is hilarious. But yeah, like even on the taste notes, like just for example, on the back of the bottle, like you'll see, like when we put taste notes out, you're not trying to be broad to be, rude or whatever. You're trying to be broad because, as I was saying to you, different flavors fall into different things. So as you can see, like on the back of it, it'll say warm floral, citrus, and cherry notes on the nose, and then a zesty hints of raisins, almonds, sweet spice, raspberry, concluding with a long finish of summer fruits, pepper, and cinnamon spice. So it's kind of like it's given broad terms because each one of you are going to taste different things. And you can't be really, really specific. So like zesty can mean citrusy, it can mean, fruity, it can mean, different things to different people. Spice, pepper, generally white pepper or black pepper, it depends on the person's palate. So that's why taste notes are always a little bit broad. It's to give people the chance to taste and see the different things because everyone picks up different, but they're actually all generally fall into the same kind of thing. 8. There might be a 9th special one. We're not sure, but 8 is what we're going with so far. Welcome to Dingle. We think it'll be 8. Yeah. Over the course of 2 years. Yeah. So then, like we turned 10 last month. What month are we in now? December. Yeah, we turned 10 in so we've been, Dingle was first established in November 2012. So we just turned 10. So like a lot of people are like, oh, why aren't you releasing a 10-year-old whiskey? But generally you don't release a 10-year-old until a year or two after you turn 10. Maybe when you're 12 or 13. You might release a little bit if there's cask good enough, but generally again, it's the whole thing of having stock behind you. So just to explain as well, the way it's broken down, we do a certain amount production single malt, certain amount single pot still, and then a certain amount of other whiskey that we make. So like generally our year will be about 60% single malt, about 30% single pot still, and then 10% of other whiskey, which would be old pot still recipes, rye recipes, peated recipes, different things we want to do. And then we break them down into casks as well. So it's all about cask management. Like Graham, like I know an awful lot of people think head distillers are actually pretty active on the floor. Head distillers are actually more up in an office, sitting on their arse playing solitaire. I know, I'm only messing. That's just for Graham. I know, but they do be in an office because an awful lot of the time is they're ordering casks, they're organizing malt deliveries, they're organizing like different things for the gin or whatever else you're making. So like you like, for example, we've got 2 distillers on each shift. You do 2 shifts a day generally. So if anything goes drastically wrong, then Graham will go down and see what the crack is. But the lads or the girls are generally able to handle whatever they need to handle. The master distiller's job is generally cask management and getting everything so that they can keep distilling. And then we break the different types down into casks. So we do about 40 to 50% in bourbon casks, another 30-odd% into sherry type casks, 10% into port, and then 10% into loads of different other types of casks, like I was saying before, champagne, armagnac, mezcal, tequila, wine casks, you name it. So we've loads of different types of casks. But the only thing is, you have to do that consistently. So let's say you go, oh, I'm getting 10 casks of this thing, this wine from some mountain somewhere that's, it shouldn't really grow there, but it's so unique. And you do that, and then you age it, and 12 years later, you release it as a 10-year-old, and people bite the hand off you first. And then they're like, when are you releasing the next one? And you're like, we only did it the once. So the whole idea, it's one of the things Graham said. He says, you're like a custodian of the distillery. He's like, I'm a custodian for the next 30-odd years or 40 years or whatever. He says, if I don't die of a heart attack for eating too many fry-ups. But he was like, I'm a custodian and I have to hand it on to the next person so that they have the same stock coming up behind them. So like in 10 years' time, if I decide, right, I'm going to release a port, wine, and bourbon-aged whiskey, then I know I've got the stock behind me coming that I can have that as a continuous release. Whereas if you didn't do that, then you can only do it as a once-off special, So it's about doing it continuously. It's like I crush an awful lot of brewer and distiller students' hearts when they're like, oh, I can't wait to get brewing and distilling. And I was like, you do realize 90% of the whole year is doing the same thing over and over again, so it's consistent. They're like, oh no, but I'm going to make this and I'm going to make that. And I was like, yeah, for maybe 2 weeks of the year, but the rest is doing the same thing over and over again, because you have to. If you want to do something, if you want it for longevity, you have to do this. Any questions? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like we I suppose we were lucky because the lads were like the first, like on the brewery side of things, they had a name from the porterhouse. And then on the Dingle side of things, we would have been the first independent distillery in Ireland in over 100 years. So we had that, and we were only pretty much like the second, let's say, if you want the producer of single pot still from a single distill, like it was just Dingle and Middleton. Cooley were making it, but it's like, it wasn't, let's say, an independent family like ourselves. But we would normally the way, because we're a small company, there's only a handful of us. And like, for example, one year I was doing Belfast Whiskey Social up in, whatever you call it, the waterfront. And these 2 guys came up to me and they were like, oh, do you mind if I take a few pictures of these bottles? And I was like, lads, put them whatever way you like, work away, take as many pictures as you like. And then they showed me a few pictures on the cameras. And I was like, here, send them on to me. And I'll see. And that's the Hunter brothers. And they've done 2 or 3 photo shoots for us since, or more actually. And then we always try and rotate it between different Irish companies around, different people. Like I'll do cocktails every 2 years. I'll do like 30 or 40 or 50 cocktails, and I'll do it with a new camera or a new photographer. And we'll do, like, the first batch I did 5 years ago was all like classic cocktails. And then I did one during COVID where it was literally just me and the photographer in the warehouse. And because there was nobody else, because we had social distance and all that. And it was literally just me and him. And I was doing like 50 cocktails in different glasses. And he was literally grabbing them and sticking them all around all different places to get different shots. People thought I was mad because during COVID, I was trying to get edible flowers put on some of the cocktails just for the photo. And sure, could I get them? No. So there was me leaning over the bridge at the distillery, picking growers off fucking the bushes. And people driving by going, what the fuck is Dave at? But it worked. The shot came out really well. I was like there putting the thing in. But yeah, we kind of try and use different photographers that come. Yeah, a lot of them would just come up to us and say, like, I'm meeting somebody now Wednesday? Yeah, Wednesday or Thursday, and she does art. Same as a girl I met up in Belfast, and she did this cool portrait of this bottle. because I wanted to kind of commemorate us getting this bottle, and she's an artist up in Belfast, and she did it, and I was like, I'm taking it, I'm bringing it to shows, and she was like, what? And I was like, yeah, here, give me. And I'm meeting another one now in Dublin, and she was doing ones on the gin bottle, and I was like, right, I'm going to meet you, we'll have a chat, and I'll give you a few bits, and you can do what you want to do, and then come back to us. And I was like, I can't guarantee something will happen, but something might happen, you know? So because we're small, I can literally just go to, because there was only ever one person in marketing or two, and I'm like, here, this person I met, here's all their stuff. I think they're really cool. Give them a go if you want to or not. But yeah, you do have to build up a database of pictures just to have them relevant for different times of the year. And just to capture people's imagination, you know? Like, there's one bottle, picture of this bottle. We were doing it, we had a gathering, so we brought loads of international people and local accounts, so like off licenses and bars from Ireland and across the world. Our distributors from across the world brought 70 or 80 of them to Dingle. And we had this big, massive fire pit in Dick Mack's beer garden. Like, I mean, it was 6 foot wide. And Stephen, our international manager, was like, here, give me the bottle. I'm going to take a picture. And we had the staves in the fire. And Stephen put the bottle in on top of one of the staves. And me and Doug were like, Stephen, that's fucking cast proof. And we were like going like this, what are you doing? And he was like, take the picture quick. And he took the picture and took it out. And that's the picture. Like, and he stuck his hand into it. I was like, lad, if that explodes, you can back off. But he literally took it. But like, there was different things. Like, they're not always as crazy as that. But we try and get somebody different each time. And we always try and rotate it between different Irish photographers so that we're kind of sharing the love and, you know, giving different business to different photographers and people that want to try stuff, you know? Yeah. 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 Exactly. And an awful lot of them will end up working for PR companies that work for the big brands that do this all the time. And it's always nice to kind of, and plus, if you use the same one over and over again, they always end up just doing the same shop because it's the, yeah, so you want different things all the time as well. Exactly. Yeah. But it's great. We kind of always try and look at local people and try and, same as like I'm doing a coffee, beer, and whiskey night on Thursday night with Silver Skin, who we did a coffee stout, breakfast coffee stout with him, and then we did an imperial barrel-aged coffee stout. So it was like a beer with coffee and then put into Dingle barrels and then taken out, and it's like 13%. But then we also gave him the barrels, the sherry butt barrels, and he put coffee in it. But he was moving premises and forgot about the fucking cask, and then took it out, realized it, and he sold the coffee, and it was whiskey-aged coffee. Whiskey barrel-aged coffee. It was called whiskey-aged 209 because it was in for 209 days, and it was mental. It tasted like strawberries and cream. It was the craziest thing I've ever tasted. But like, it literally sold like he put up like the whole barrel, and it was gone in like 2 or 3 hours. You know, it was just mad. It's just different things like that. It's always fun to try those different things with different, you know, other Irish people, other Irish companies, or people trying to do different things. But yeah, how did you find sound? Yeah. 85. Yes, 85. Yeah, some of those people find the box a bit hard to. Mark designs all our labels. He's been working for Porterhouse and Dingle. He's one of Oliver's and Liam's friends since 20, 30 years or more. Yeah. It's just something because like the Remboy, it's kind of like pagan Celtic. And then, like, we still celebrate a lot. And they've kind of come back into focus a bit more, like a lot of the old Irish festivals. You know, now next year, like, we were going to have the first St. Bridget's Day holiday, like, you know, at last. You know, break up that start of the year. Give us a break. But yeah, it's a really interesting one. The next couple of releases will be as interesting. Yeah, I call it a double maturation more than a finish, but there's no actual technical rule on it. Anybody, any other questions? I'd say have a drink of water before you try the next one, because that one was cast strength.
You mentioned earlier on you have a certain percentage of other whiskies.
Yeah.
So have you any kind of what was it, non-compliant?
Yes. Yeah. We had, so like when Michael was with us, we did an old band, if any you remember the old Beardy Distillery from County Cork that closed in the 1940s or 50s, was it? They actually had an old pot still recipe that had 5 component parts, which was oat or barley, malted barley, raw barley, oats, wheat, and I think it was rye. And we made that old recipe. And so you've got IBCs, which is like plastic container. They're inert containers, which means they don't impart any flavor. So like the lads made it, Michael and Fiona made it as a bit of a, let's make this and see what it's like. Because we were all petitioning, and we have been petitioning the Irish Whiskey Association to change the rules. And that had been in inert containers. I think Graham might have put it in casks, but we have made other ones, and they are in casks. But yeah, technically you couldn't release them until the technical file changes. Yeah, you could release them, but you couldn't call them single pot still. So like Kilbeggan have that rye whiskey out. That's actually a single pot still. So the red bottle Kilbeggan rye, that's actually single pot still. That's an old single pot still recipe. But because it didn't fall into the technical file, they weren't allowed to name it single pot still. But that's actually an old Irish single pot still recipe. Yeah. So the reason they put in the technical file was just to protect it, because a lot of Irish whiskey got bootlegged and bastardized back in like 100 years ago, where they were bringing Scottish whiskey across the Canadian border, mixing it with moonshine, calling it Irish whiskey. They were getting way more money. They were making 100-300% more extra on top of what they were normally getting. Calling it Irish whiskey, and they just wrecked it. They destroyed it, and they were mixing it with Irish whiskey, Scottish whiskey, and moonshine. They were just making, and that's why, like, if you go across America, like people, when they just ask for a whiskey, they just mean Scotch, some of them, the further you go across, because they don't actually know the difference between Irish and Scottish whiskey. They think whiskey is just Scottish, that kind of way. And that's what I mean about, like, Irish whiskey is growing, but there's still a mass education that has to be done all across the globe to bring it back to being the #1 best-selling whiskey in the world. Like, it's getting there, but it just takes time. Single pot still is probably the one that needs the most education. Not only because of the name, because it's extremely confusing for people when you say it's nothing to do with the instrument that it's made in, or the pot still, because it actually can be made in pot still or column stills. It's the recipe. And then when you try and explain the recipe, the current recipe is like 45, 45, and 10. It can be 45 raw, 45 malted, and 10% of other grain. Most distilleries just stick with 50-50 or a different, so we do 60% malted and 40% unmalted barley. But they're hoping to change this. It looks like it might happen in the next year or two, where it'll be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, which will open it up to some of the old recipes that were back in existence like 100, not even 100 years ago, 70 years ago, 60 years ago. Because like the best way I always describe single pot still, it's like Irish accents. Every area had its accent. Every area had its single pot still recipe. And then it depended on the time of the season, what the farmers had that they gave. Like some distilleries would have had 4 or 5 different pot still recipes. And the reason pot still, you probably all know, but the pot still came in because the Queen, when she was trying to be in charge of Ireland and failing, she was trying to put a tax on the bottles coming out of the distilleries. Her revenue guys were trying to tax the bottles, but then they realized the staff were getting paid in bottles. So they were getting paid. It was kind of called 2 parts brown, 1 part white, or 2 parts white, 1 part brown, which meant you were getting a bottle of whiskey and 2 bottles of new make, and you'd be putting them in your trousers or your skirt, and you'd be going out the door, and sure, the revenue guys couldn't count them. So you're getting your weekly pay packet, and you're getting that. And that's where your grocer shops and your whiskey bonders and your wine, because they used to go to their local pub or grocer and go, here's these bottles, can I get ham, cheese, whatever the hell you wanted. And those grocers would have had port casks and sherry casks in the back that they were selling by the pint or the quarter. And so they would have had empty casks, and then they used to put that new maker whiskey into them and make their own whiskey. And that's why you have all the pubs that used to say whiskey bonder, wine merchant, grocer. Which for me, I'd love if that came back, because I think it's absolutely feckin' deadly. Because then it'll make them a bit of difference to them all and make them a bit more unique. There is some whiskey bonders coming back. You've got W.D. O'Connell, you've got J.J. Corrie, you've got like a few of them coming back that are trying to bring back the whiskey bonding thing. But because you couldn't tax the bottles, you taxed the malt coming in. So in the good old Irish spirits, the distillers were like, well, fuck that. And they started using raw barley, wheat, oats, rye, whatever the farmer was growing, and pot still was created. So for me, your quintessential Irish whiskey is single pot still. It kind of reflects the character of Irish people. When we hit some kind of barrier, we always find a way around it. So for me, it's kind of that's the character of Ireland. If you really like, if ever I was bringing somebody a whiskey, it always, like when I went to visit my brother in New Zealand, I brought him a single pot still because I was like, that's as Irish as you can get, you know. But the only problem with single pot still, if I was making single malt and single pot still, and I started with the same, let's say, tonnage or amount, weight of ingredients, I would fill that bottle of single malt. Let's say, make one bottle. I would only fill 70 to 80% of this bottle. Because you're using raw barley, the whole thing of malted barley is you're malting the barley, so you're making the barley sprout. So you're opening that shell of the barley, and because you want to extract the starch, convert to sugars, and then convert that sugar to alcohol with the yeast. But because you're using raw, you're not getting that same effect. So your yield is a lot less. Even though it's something that we all love to drink, that's the reason why single pot still whiskies are generally 15 to 20% more expensive than your single malts, because you're getting a way less yield for the same amount of work. Actually, it's more work for us because when you make it in the mash tun, it kind of forms these little fucking porridge balls. And the lads and the girls are literally there with the shovels scraping it off the wooden mash tun. It's like, they love it. They love drinking it, but making it, especially in our old system, they're like, Jesus Christ, fucking, you know, but it's one of those works of pain to give you pleasure, you know. So yeah, this single pot still is the last single pot still in the releases that we did. So we did 5 single pot still releases and we did 6 single malt releases. And this is all aged in bourbon casks. So the last 2 releases that we did, the single malt was 100% all aged in tawny port, and the single pot still was 100% all aged in bourbon casks. So yeah, this one is lovely, creamy, buttery. Now, the characteristics of a single pot still, you'll always see, like, if anyone tries to explain, like a malt is kind of big, round in your mouth, and then it has this kind of long kind of finish. You know, it's kind of like a nice kind of smooth whiskey, where single pot still, the characteristics is creamy and oily in your mouth. So the best way I would describe it is like when you eat fish and chips and you have that oiliness on the inside of your mouth after you've eaten it. It just sits and coats the inside of your mouth and your tongue. And then it has this spice on the back of your throat, which is I kind of call it like a crystallized ginger spice, or some people would say nearly like a white pepper spice. It's not like jalapenos or hot or peppers. It's more like a, you know, like a tingly kind of spice on the back of your throat. Because sometimes when you say spice, people are like, oh, geez, I don't like spice, but it's not that kind of spice. It's more like that kind of crystal kind of spice on the back of your throat. But yeah, like for us, like we'd make 30%, I'd say, of our production, 30%, and then a little bit of other old recipes would be single pot still. In the beginning, it was meant to be 60-40, but the first couple of years, it would have been more 70-30 or maybe 80-20, because just trying to get the single pot still right was tricky. Like when we first distilled any of our spirit in Dingle, the lads were putting them into casks at 70%, and then we realized it was too high. So we were cutting it back to 65 before we put it into the cask. Because sometimes if it's too spirited going in initially, it won't do anything. It'll never actually soften up. It'll always punch you in the face when you try and drink it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, like we would have had really good relationships with a few of the head distillers in Scotland and that, and they came over and they were like, lads, you need to change this. This isn't going to work, or that's not going to work. And then they'd show you the different ways. So the lads were like, the lads, because they've been in the industry so long, especially on the beer side of things, they had friends all over the place, and they were like, they had a lot of help from different people coming in and going, listen, and they're just mates. And they're like, no, you don't want to do that. You want to do this, and I can show you why you want to do this. So it's trial and error, you know. Same with the cask program, like the founding fathers. When we started releasing them, Revenue had a field day with us because they didn't know what the hell was going on, that we had these 500 individuals and they wanted to bottle their own whiskey. Whereas like Middleton and Bushmills did it, but like they were doing it for 6 figures, 5, 6, 7 figures, and Revenue were getting a nice check, so they didn't care. But we were dealing with 500 individual groups, and it was all smaller amounts, and they were like we'd get the same letter from 3 different Revenue guys in the space of 2 weeks, and we were like, we've already fucking answered this. What the fuck? You know? Like one day I walked into the brewery and Peter was just like, look at this fucking shit. And I was like, what's that? And he was like, this is the 3rd fucker in like 14 days. And he was like, have these people paid the duty on their bottles? And because once, if you have a private cask we have it done in such a way that the minute it's out the door, everything has been paid. So, you know, not unless you go and try and sell them, then revenue will come for you for capital gains. But there's always gray areas where you can dodge that as well, which I won't say in camera. We do live on an island that is technically 2 jurisdictions, but anyway, I won't say that anymore. Yeah. So yeah, there's always gray areas if you look. But yeah, so they kind of, because we were the first to kind of do it, they were like, who are all the, and because they hadn't a system in place to go, you know, tick this, okay, everything's done. They were literally learning as we were doing it. So we have done another cask program called the Descendants. So we're doing it every 2.5 years, where we pick different style of whiskey and different cask types. And we're only doing 100 casks. That's about 5 weeks production for us, 4 to 5 weeks production for us. And we have all the terms and conditions. Because a lot of people are like, oh, I want to buy a cask. I'm going to bring it and put it in my back shed at home. And I'm like, no, you can't. And they're like, but that's what, and I'm like, I'm not telling you you can't. I'm like, it's against the law. And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, do you have a wholesaler license? No. Do you have a bonded warehouse? No. Sorry, you can't touch it. You have to leave it where it is. And it's just, you had all those kind of things where people didn't understand. And it's totally, I get it, because if you're not in the industry, you don't know what it is. So just with the Descendants one, we actually put all these details on it so that people understood, oh, I can't just drive down there and throw it in the back of my hatchback and drive home with it, you know? So yeah, there was a lot of that kind of, but now there's an awful lot of distilleries that are doing private casks, which is great. If you have an interest, some people do it as investment, some people just do it like like one guy from America that had it, he has 3 casks with us, and he bottled one of them just for his daughter's wedding and put a bottle on everyone's table. And that's what he did. And he's yeah, he has the money. He's, as he said, I'm not after to make money. This is something for me and my family. So that's what he wanted to do. And it was pretty cool. He kept 50 of the bottles and then put the rest on all the tables, and that was it, you know? So yeah, but yeah, for me, single pot still is one of those whiskeys. Yes, it's a bit more expensive. You are seeing what I would probably call the renaissance of single pot still whiskey that just happened, that I'd say is about to kick off, because the biggest, if not, yeah, the biggest distillery in Ireland, Middleton, released the Jameson continuous single pot still. So for me now, that is the start of the single pot still renaissance or revolution, because once one of the big companies decides to go with it, they've got the bodies on the ground to start going, doing the tastings, educating the bar staff, educating the off-license staff on what single pot still is. Because that's probably going to be the biggest hurdle for single pot still. When they taste it, they love it, but it's just making them understand, you know, what single pot still is. Yeah. And it's just like, by the time they do that for the next 5 or 10 years, then all the rest of the other distilleries will have enough stock to go out, and then there'll be more. So like what I'm looking forward to in the next, like we're 10 this year, like if you give it another 5 years or so, you're going to have 20 distilleries. Like when we started, there was only 3 distilleries and then us, and now there's 45, I think it is, in production or being built. And like, if you think about in 5 or 10 years time, 20 of them have been going for at least 5 or 6 years. In 5 or 10 years time, you're going to be able to sit down with like 10, let's say 10-year-old single malts or 8-year-old single malts and do a comparison tasting between all the different distilleries. And you'll be able to see the difference between them. And that's the beauty of Irish whiskey. Like, you mightn't like one, but it's like going into a bookshop or a library. There's a book there for everybody. There'll be an Irish whiskey there for everybody. And that's the thing. Like, if you're not drinking our one, drink somebody else's Irish whiskey, you know? Like, we're not against each other. We're like one big family. We all know each other. We all get on really well, and we all help each other out. Because for us, it's kind of like, it's an industry as a whole moving forward, because we have to educate the world and try and get more people drinking Irish whiskey. Yeah, but it's all like good banter and slagging and stuff. Like when I was doing The Hague, like I was chatting to Malcolm from Speyside, you know, the little skinny, tall Spey whiskey. And we were just having slag because we were setting up for a masterclass. He was in the room beside the room I was, and we were outside and we were just talking shit and having a bit of a laugh. And then he was at the one in Milan, and the lads from Loughrea were there, and they were like, "Oh, here, there's this bollocks talking shit about you, and they send me a picture, and it's Malcolm." And I was like, "Oh, for fuck's sake!" But it's just like, it's a bit of crack, and because most of the time, the only time we ever get to see each other is when we're doing stuff like Whiskey Live or some whiskey event, because we're always running around like mad Egypts all over the place. But yeah, so it's like we kind of see it as a whole, and then when we do see the Scottish or the Americans or the English or Japanese, we just have generally good kind of slagging banter. Yeah, big time. Yeah, like it's funny. One of the biggest, the head of one of the biggest companies in the world that makes, let's say, your cheaper products, but has also moved into, let's say, has started buying more of the luxury products. During COVID, there was like a big industry Zoom, it was like one of these expos, but they did it on Zoom. And he was like, people are going out or spending less often, but they're paying for higher quality products because they're educating themselves on what the products are. And we were all like watching the Zoom, and we were all messaging each other, and we were like, does he realize that 80% of his products are those ones that he's slagging off? And we were just like literally all of his products, apart from a handful, but like they're huge. And I was like, he's literally slagging off like half of the product or more than half of the products he makes. But he had a point, and it was something like, even when I was running bars, I noticed when we renovated one of the bars we renovated, we changed all our cocktails, we changed all our drinks, went for more bespoke and higher end. And like Tommy, one of the lads that was working with me, he's like, nobody's going to fucking pay. This is ridiculous. And then the first year, he was like, this is nuts. He's like, we're after doing twice as much. But like people were, instead of people coming out every week, they were coming out twice a month or once a month, but they were actually spending like, no, I want this drink and I want this food. And they wanted quality. And there was like, they weren't just going for, cheap and cheerful, which is nothing wrong with it. But they were like, right, if we're only going out once or twice, I want it to be memorable. That kind of way. So they were, and they were like, oh no, I had that. And they'd be coming in asking for specific whiskeys or specific cocktails. And they're like, no, I love that. And you're just like, fucking hell, fair play, But that's the way it has gone. Yeah. No, it's if you're on Instagram, it's on there. It's on my page. Just look at Beardy Dave. You'll see a picture of it. Yeah, it's literally one of the cocktails on it. I can send you the recipe. It's pretty easy. It's just an old-fashioned, just instead of the sugar, just a spoon of maple syrup and then bacon. That's it. Yeah. I know, like I've literally worked for independent family-owned businesses since I ran pubs for a living, pubs, restaurants, hotels, off-license and nightclubs and stuff for 20-odd years. And everybody I worked for were independent family businesses. So the FX Buckleys up in Dublin, they would have been the ones that, like, I worked with Des and Stephen and Brian there and renovated all their premises and did up all their menus and cocktails. So then, like, all the breweries and the distilleries that were starting off, they used to have launch nights in with me. So they all just became my friends. And then I ended up working in Celtic Whiskey Shop as a spirit and wine specialist for about 5 or 6 years. And I was taking a break to give my dad a hand on the farm. And I bumped into the lads in the porterhouse. And they were like, come in and chat to us. And like, I finished working Celtic on the Sunday, met the lads on the Wednesday, and started the following Monday. So I was like, feck that for taking time off. But anyway. No, pedigree beef and rare breeds, that's it. Anybody want an Angus bull or a Simmental bull, let me know. Yeah, so like I used to know the lads because I ran the Bull and Castle in Christchurch, and they were porterhouse and Temp Bar. So like anybody that used to come in, we didn't have any macro beers, and we had I was using Teeling small batch as my whiskey. I was using Dingle gin and vodka as my gin and vodka because I knew the lads for years. So I was trying to support as much Irish products as I could. So then when we had customers coming into us, like if they were tourists or if they were locals, they'd be like, oh, where else can we go and get something that's similar like this? And I'd be like, go down to Gina and to Alan in Porterhouse, they'll look after you. And then Gina and Alan in Porterhouse would be sending them back, other people back up to me, because we were the only two bars that were offering, let's say, something different. So yeah, so that's how you just, like, the lads that I work for, like Dingle and Porter, they're like, how the hell do you know this person? How the hell do you know? I was like, sure, when they started, I launched their beer in the pub, or when they started, I did a cocktail night for them and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, what? And I was like, yeah, they're just mates of mine. That's it, like, you know, because it is that kind of, it is a small enough industry, like, and when at the beginning, there was only a handful. Now it's like a little bit more crazy, but there was only a handful. Well, I used to work in the pub at the weekend in Athlone when I was in secondary school, and then ended up running a couple of college bars while I was in college as well. Yeah. There's no waste. It all goes to local farmers. Oh no, it's too far away. Like I would have got it from somebody local, but like so, like in the brewery up in Dublin, there's a lad in Rathcoole. He comes twice a week and empties our hop and mash bin, and he takes it for his cattle and pigs. And then down in Dingle, Michael, yeah. And then down in Dingle, Michael's there. So Michael used to be our head distiller. He's the head distiller in Boan now. Michael's there, David Dairy Farm, about 2 or 3 miles down the road. Michael's dad comes and picks up all the spent malt I think it's every day or every second day from the distillery. So there's zero waste. No, leave the Wagyu out. Too much marbling. But yeah, no, that's the beauty of brewing and distilling. There's zero waste. Everything goes back into something. I remember even like one of the lads, Stephen in Trouble Brewing, he's just on the Nace Road on the N7, and he gives all his hops and spent malt to a local piggery, a local pig farmer, and the pig farmer's like, literally, when I'm driving down the road with the load, they start going mental. They know it's coming, and he says, and then they eat it like crazy, and they're asleep for the rest of the day. And then he says, and then they wake up, and all they want is food. Food. He says, he's like, they just hear you coming, and they're like, oh yeah, let's go. And he's just like, mad. It's hilarious. But yeah, it's the one good thing about it. Anybody, any questions? Yeah.
Is there a drift to the middle shelf for the Irish coffee and the French coffee and the British coffee? Is there?
Like I would like I've made like I'm going to be making hazelnut Irish coffees with that on Thursday night. Yeah. Like, or I might even what? Huh? Why not? Why not? Because you can. But I do orange coffees with that as well, because there's a lot of kind of orange flavors coming through. So I throw a spoon of Cointreau in and make an Irish coffee with it. Yeah. So you can do like I've made Irish coffees with this where I've thrown in a spoon of Cointreau, another one where I've thrown in a spoon of Pedro Jimenez. I've done another one where I've thrown in a spoon of Frangelico. Like you can do whatever, you know. It's literally what I do is whenever I taste or I smell and let's say a whiskey, a gin or something, it's whatever flavors are in that you're going to get something and add on to it. So like if you're getting orange or citrus, I'm going to add a little bit more orange, or I'm going to, you know, yeah. But like, yeah, I stick them up. Yeah, I generally stick them up. Like I've got a cocktail cheat sheet that I send to bars that I help out and consult, like just go in and help them out get going. And I'm like, are you ready for this? And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm warning you. I was like, don't be messaging me going, I'm trying to read this in one day, because it's like 30 A4 pages long. And I'm like, just take the ones that, because it's literally festival cocktails, classic cocktails, crazy ass cocktails that me and Dan, because Dan, one of the lads that works in the brewery, he used to run cocktail bars. So I'll take Dan for I'll take Dan for an evening, one Friday evening, because he's got a really good palate and he knows what he's doing. And like, so the last set of cocktails I did for Dingle, I went back to old Prohibition recipes. Now, the only thing with Prohibition recipes they were very spirit driven, because people were hiding and, you know, trying to keep the spirits away from the law. So some of them were like, you were looking at the recipes, like these recipes were from like 1900, and you're just like going, what the fuck is this? And I'm kind of like going, that shouldn't work, but I'm going to give it a try. But then you just tweak it to suit the modern palate. But like we made one and I was like, this is definitely not going to work. This is going to be, and then tried it and we were like, holy fuck, this is actually really good. And then we just tweaked it a little bit by adding a little bit of Longville House brandy from Cork and some other bits. And then we made another one. And I was like, oh, this should be deadly. And we couldn't even put our nose in it. It was absolutely, but like, for me, it doesn't matter. Like, if you're going to like obviously if you're going to like do a Middleton Barry Crockett, like 250, like you want to be making something that's absolutely fucking out of this world. But like, if you like the flavors or something in it and it strikes a chord with you where you're like, oh, actually, if I make this with this is going to be really good, then do it. You know? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, no. Just message me. I can send it on to you from that. Yeah. But like, it's literally like the thing is, I always look for the flavors that are in it and then try and add to it, you know? Because you're always, it's the whole thing. You try and not make it compatible, but you're trying to add to it or, you know, bring it on a little bit further. But like single malts, adding up to 60 or 60 quid, like you can mess around. Like for me, I'd be messing around with that, making cocktails with it. Definitely. Then when you're going higher than that, then I'm like, okay, maybe I might take my time with it. But like generally, like you'll get bars making cocktails out of whiskeys up. Like you've seen green spot cocktails, you see red breast cocktails. Like very rarely, but they're in kind of like whiskey bars and stuff like that. But they're the ones that have been doing it for years and they know what they're doing. So they're not, yeah, you're paying for it. Yeah, you're going to be paying 12 to 15 euro for the cocktail. Like, see, there's nothing wrong with blends. Blends are there to do a job. They're there, like it's that whole Johnny Walker Red thing. It's an every man's drink. So the reason why Johnny Walker brought out the bottle of red was he wanted, no matter if the person was rich or poor, to be able to afford a bottle of whiskey and do what they wanted with it. So that's the whole idea of blends. Generally, blends are higher in grain because grain whiskey is cheaper. Generally, you can make it in a column still, so you can make a lot more of it, cheaper to make, quicker to make, and you're not going to, you know, you can sell at a price point that's that. So like some people, like if you talk to cocktail people, I won't say the nickname that a lot of people use from the industry. I know, they're really sound. If you talk to a lot of them, they'll find that grain whiskey just doesn't have enough body to do stuff with. Do you know what I mean? So like the only, like if you're thinking of like, if you think of bourbon cocktails, you think of old fashions where you're adding in sugar and you're adding in bitters, you're adding on to a lot of flavors. Or Manhattans, you're adding vermouth and stuff like that because you're trying to add more onto it. So like they feel sometimes that some of the blends are a little bit too light on the flavor that they can't, you know, they won't actually enhance the cocktail. So you want something that'll enhance the cocktail. And like that aged in all first fill casks is, you know, can't really go wrong with it, you know? But yeah, I always say play around with it. Always play around with it. Like, don't be afraid to, you know, add a little. Because like a spoon like is 5 mils. That's all it is. You're just adding them, you know, and test it out, you know? It's always a bit of fun as well. And plus, even if it's crap, you're going to drink it. You're not going to be like, oh, feck it. You're going to be like, okay, that one didn't work. Still going to drink it, and I'll try a different one the next time. You know? You know? It's like home brewers when they make like 10 liters of a beer and it's absolute muck. And they're like, I still drank it. And I'm like, and they're like, oh, it went wrong at the kettle stage or it went wrong at the whirlpool stage. I was like, what did you do with it? Oh, feck it, I drank it. And I'm like, of course you could drink it. You're not going to chuck it down the drain. Anybody, any other questions? No? No worries. I just want to say thanks a million for having me, and I hope you all have a good Christmas. Yeah, I will. Good. Glad you. Cheers. Thanks, everybody at home. I didn't curse too much.